All right, I'm going to call the first workshop of the LDC, Article 4, to order. All right, we've already done the pledge, but I guess we're going to pledge twice? No, we're pushing on through. We're pushing on through. All right, starting to the workshop. We're just here.
All right, Mr. Mayor, council members, members of the public, thank you for being here tonight. I stated this at the presentation at the council meeting, setting the dates for the workshops, how big of a deal it is that we are here tonight. Being here almost 3 years to the month after this project actually started, when we got the first draft from the council or from our consultants, is fast. And it does not compromise the quality of this work. This is, I think, what staff has put together in concert with the committees, with the public, and the consultants, is a great product. We have listened to comments, we have listened to the will of the committees, we've taken intent that we've heard from council at council meetings and other forums, and put that into what we feel is a great draft Article 4. So with that, again, thank you all for your support through this. Thank you to staff and their efforts. Thank you to our consultants. And thank you again also to Lewis, who's just been a driving force for all of this. So before we get into the meat of this, we'll just cover what we're going to talk about tonight, which is what is in Article 4, what the major changes are, what was discussed at the various public workshops and LPA meetings, along with other additional topics, and then specifically the zoning, the recommended and proposed zoning district consolidation, which is in your packet. So before we get into all that, though, I'd like to invite up Mr. Jim Wood. He is the chairman of the LPA, the local planning agency, to really kind of go over the LPA's effort and what they have given staff through all those public meetings and workshops that we've had on this specific article. Jim.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. Jim Wood, 3790 Misty Way, your chairman of our city LPA. Back in the back, I have one of my other members, Mr. Todd Burr, back in the back here. Normally, I like to be about a 5 to 10,000 foot kind of guy. When I need guys with dirty knees and dirty elbows who's going to low crawl through the reeds, that's Mr. Burr's job back there. He's the guy that keeps us honest. So having him on the team makes us all better. As Steve has said, this has been almost a 3-year process. There are most stools are 3-legged. We're trying to give you a 5-legged stool at the end of the day. Between a comp plan, a land development code, a zoning map, a future land use map, and a design manual. So those 5 legs being there, that ought to be a pretty sturdy stool, we hope. So a lot of details gone into this. You know, at the end of the day, is everything perfect? You know, the few changes we've actually made, did they hit the mark perfectly? I think so. Maybe we find out after the fact, maybe we missed the mark a little bit on something. With the way this documents have been reorganized and consolidated, it's going to make it easier to make those changes if we need to. But until we get into practice, we won't really know whether we need to refine something. So I'd like to not take months and months from this point. The sooner we get it approved and get it into practice, we can find those unintended consequences that maybe we didn't think about. We'll see. I had a class on comp plans and LDCs when I was on council years ago, and what we're doing now is finally what I learned in that class, probably 10 years ago. You know, my daughter works in Huntsville for the Army. She does manuals and publications. A lot of the same things we're doing here, she's going through there. Organization, electronic links, more charts, less long run-on paragraphs that are hard to read, making things easier to deal with. I know there were some individual questions tonight, and you may find out, oh, by the way, because it's easier to read, you may find things that are actually already there, but now you see them. So some of those questions might be really simple, so we'll see how that goes. We, as the LPA, really appreciate the staff, 3TP, and all the folks that have had input into the process. It has been a pleasure and honor to serve with everybody so far, and I hope that will continue long into the future. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. O'Connor and his guys, and take it away.
Oh, sir.
All right, so getting back to it, Article 4 currently lives in Article 7. Reorganization was a big part of this effort. So not all the articles that currently exist are going to exist in the currently proposed LDC. That being said, Article 7 is turning to Article 4 because of just the general format and layout of the new proposed LDC. Article 7, current Article 7 includes the zoning districts overlays in Section 712. It also has supplemental requirements within Article 7. And then what was added to Article 4 was the parking requirements that live in Article 8 currently, okay? Now talking about other changes, other major changes, language. This part of the LDC is probably one of the more difficult parts of the current LDC that gives staff and the public a lot of problems because it's cumbersome to read, it's hard to read, it's hard to sometimes interpret. There are conflicts in some of the language, there's ambiguity in a lot of the language. So therefore it makes it difficult to stay consistent in enforcement as well as to enforce. The current draft, proposed draft, is quite a bit more readable. There are areas where you can't make it 100% non-legalese in language, but where we could, we definitely changed that. That was one of the main efforts in this whole thing. When you reduce it, you make it more readable, it's easier for not only staff, but the general public to read. It also makes it easier for staff to be consistent in enforcement and for enforcement thereof. Formatting. You all have been in it, you've seen it. It flows, it goes paragraph to paragraph. It's for the most part indented properly, follows some sort of legible mapping. But at the end of the day, it's still very cumbersome because of not only the long run-on format and paragraphs that have up to 20 different regulations within the one paragraph. It's difficult to read just because of the formatting, not just because of the language. Not only that, it's not interactive. You can't click on things in the current LDC and jump to where it's referencing. That's changed in the current proposed drafts. The table of contents, every section of the table of contents, you can click on it and it goes straight to that section. Where there's a hyperlink for sections, and if you've gotten into draft Article 4 currently, in the table of uses, you'll see supplemental design standards. There might be a reference to a section in there. You click on that and it takes you to the main section. And then you can kind of just scroll straight through that rather than having to go through 80 other pages just to get to the supplemental design standards. We have taken a lot of those long run-on paragraphs and turned them into charts where applicable and where appropriate. And we've also significantly increased the use of graphics, specifically when it comes to dimensional limitations. Each zoning district within Article 4 has a graph based on single dwelling, if it's applicable, two dwellings or more if applicable, and then non-dwelling or non-residential uses in dimensional standards. So each one of those has its own graphic if applicable. Organization. Another big thing that staff has consternation with, the public has issues with, and I think all of you up here had at one point in time difficulty with, is the organization. The current draft flows quite a bit more in a logical manner. Whereas current Article 7, it does have a flow to it, but sections like Section 712 is so long and so cumbersome to get through that, again, it's just kind of difficult to find what you need. This is a lot more broken up. It's more focused. Each section is more focused on what it actually is for, and it takes out a lot of the fluff or the stuff that doesn't need to be in the Section 4 zoning districts. So just to kind of give you a quick overview as to what is currently in Article 4, it contains regulations from current Article 7, 700, 706, 707, 709, 12, 15, 16, 19, 21, and then also all the regulations that are specific to the zoning districts contained within their respective, all the zoning districts from those specific sections that are specific to a zoning district were pulled out and put back into that specific zoning district alone, rather than being clumped into a different section. So everything for a zoning district that is specific to that district lives in that district and that district alone. So therefore, you don't have to go to 3 different places within the LDC just to find what it is for, say, Crystal Beach neighborhood. It's all right there, if it's specific to the zoning district. The land use charts per zoning district have now included the parking requirement by use. So therefore, you can look at the use and what your parking demand is going to be. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's a small minor change to what we currently have, but it significantly reduces the need to go back and forth. It has also added the mobile vending as a use to the charts, and I know that was a big thing for you, Mr. Schmidt, when we had the workshop. So right now there is a whole section in Article 7, I think it's 721, that is specific just to mobile vending. And it lists out all the districts where short-term it's allowed or long-term it's allowed. What we've done is we've taken that based on the public workshop that we had on mobile vending and added mobile vending as a use to the individual zoning districts rather than it having its own specific section in the LDC. So again, no more jumping around. Consolidation, here's another real big one here, all right? We currently have 28 zoning districts. That's a lot for 7.5 square miles. Coming from Eagle County, Colorado, thousands of square acres, thousands of square miles of an area of jurisdiction, there were 10 zoning districts. So coming here to a small 7.5 square mile piece of land with 28, I know Destin is unique. It's very different than Eagle County. It's very different than Walton County. It's very different than Okaloosa County. But at the end of the day, some of the districts are very, very similar. There are some nuances to them, but at the end of the day, some of them are very similar, almost to the point where they're almost indistinguishable. And so staff did a comparative analysis of all the districts and provided that to the LPA, and that presentation was provided in your packet, and staff recommended to the LPA to consolidate 7 districts into 7 other existing districts. That reduces it from 28 districts to 21. Much more manageable, less back and forth again. Staff feels it provides a lot more clarity, a lot more ease of use, and gets rid of some of the ambiguities, and also, well, my neighbor across the street can do this. Well, they're in a different zoning district than you, even though they're across the street. So staff did that comparative analysis. We felt that there was nothing crazy. We weren't changing. We looked at the intent and purpose of each zoning district, and we maintained that to the best extent possible, and we didn't go outside of that. And the LPA took a look, a deep dive at that. We had several meetings about that, and they agreed with staff with a few nuances and a few changes, and have presented this recommended consolidation of these zoning districts here. And we can get into those specifics here momentarily. Public workshops and LPA meetings. Council did have a joint public workshop with the LPA back in August of last year. And then from that point, we took that discussion, staff took that discussion, added it into the new draft, and presented that draft to the LPA. We had 4 meetings here, as you can see up. Sorry. Yep, here we go. 4 meetings with the LPA between February and March, with the March 21 being the final recommendation for adoption to Council of Article 4. So now I'd like to get into some of the discussions that was had at the various public meetings and the public workshop. First one being parking for outdoor seating. Currently, as we all know, there is no requirement for outdoor seating when it comes to restaurants. And so what staff recommended, just to get the discussion started, was to require the same parking requirement for outdoor seating as indoor seating. Through the discussion with the LPA, they recommended that to be reduced to 50%. So if there's 100 required or 100 seats required for a 10,000 square foot, just using big numbers here, for 10,000 square foot indoor seating place, and they have 5,000 outdoor, then it would really only require 25 more seats because it's a 50% of what would be required outdoors.
Is it 4 seats for 1 parking space?
For restaurants, I'd have to dig into that so much.
Oh, bad.
No worries. I can look into that here momentarily once we get through the presentation. Short-term rentals, low-speed vehicle parking. So if some of you that were at the joint workshop, staff recommended that for short-term rentals, that there's a requirement for a low-speed vehicle parking space to be added in addition to the other required 1 space per bedroom. There was a healthy discussion on that at the public workshop. Staff went back, reworked that, brought that back to the LPA, and the LPA, pretty much the same sentiment that was had at the public workshop, the joint workshop, that it wasn't necessary, and so that is now not part of. There's no requirement for an LSV parking included for short-term rentals. Bicycle parking. Part of the discussion at the joint workshop was it varies from 0% to 20%, and can go 5, 10, 15% by use. It's very uncommon. Usually it's just across the board a percentage of the required parking. So staff made that recommendation to make it 10% across the board. That seemed to fit in with the joint workshop, and the LPA also backed that up and made that recommendation to require the 10% across the board. There are other uses such as schools where that bicycle parking is different, but that is provided in the supplemental design standards for Article 4. Tattoo versus permanent makeup. So over the last several years, there has been an increase in permanent makeup demand. Per the state classifies permanent makeup as tattoos, which makes sense because it essentially is a tattoo. At the end of the day, you boil it down, it is a tattoo. However, the intent behind them are vastly different. And so if a permanent makeup supplier.
I'm so sorry, but the live streamers would love to see it too. Can you do the clicker?
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Sorry. My apologies. Throw something at me next time, please. Here we go. Right here. Sorry. Because I can't see up here, right? So got to have it on my computer right here. All right. So backing up, tattoo versus permanent makeup. Permanent makeup is boil it down, it is a tattoo, therefore would follow the tattoo regulations where there is separation distancing. However, the intent behind the two are vastly different, okay? And so staff, based on guidance from the community development director at the time, Lewis, and after the public meeting, or the joint workshop, has classified permanent makeup as a personal service and separated it from tattoo. And the LDC rewrite clearly makes that delineation. When talking about the separation of tattoos, it clearly takes permanent makeup out and says permanent makeup suppliers, so long as they are not a part of a tattoo parlor or provider, does not adhere to the separation requirement. So you can go, a salon that's currently exists right now can provide that if they are next door to a tattoo parlor or within the distancing requirement of a tattoo parlor, so long as it is part of and is distinctly different from the tattoo parlor. Any questions on that? Okay.
Yeah, because I have questions on a few of these.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Mobile vending. Kind of hinted at this earlier. We've taken the mobile vending section in Article 7 currently and basically got rid of it and just provided the mobile vending in the land use tables, and the LPA agreed with that move as well. Further, the changes are if a restaurant was allowed conditionally or permitted in the zoning district, mobile vending is also allowed whether conditional or permitted, or permitted or conditional per the zoning district currently. So that's how that looks if you look through the land use chart in the zoning district. Primary building structure separation. In the current LDC, there's a separation requirement of 10 feet. Generally, that separation requirement is because of fire code. Fire code requires a 10-foot separation without having to have a firewall between buildings. And so the LDC kind of mirrored that when it came to primary structures, but it's not necessary because we do allow in some zoning districts multiple primary structures to be permitted on the same lot. And so to be a little less onerous on the development standard side of that, if they can meet fire code separation requirements by being able to build that firewall per the separation, the staff just took out that language, which now allows that. All right, building height, specifically in the CMU. That's next. Yeah, next one. So building height in the CMU. This one's very weird. You have a max height for non-dwelling uses at 50 feet or 4 stories, but limits all non-residential uses. So non-dwelling, which is non-residential uses, in the table says 50 and 4. However, the footnote says that all non-residential uses are limited to 35 feet and 2 stories. So again, there's that contradiction there. So which one is it, right? It's difficult to enforce because of that contradiction. Staff made the recommendation to just be consistent with the residential uses at 35 feet and 3 stories. The LPA talked about that, and then also agreed with that recommendation as well. Water taxis. So water taxis are listed as a permitted use in the non-residential zoning districts that abut water. Permitted in all districts except for the CMU. In fact, it wasn't even listed as a use in the CMU zone. Or I'm sorry, as a conditional use in the CMU zone and not permitted. So since the CMU zone abuts the water and is a transitioning zone or a zone that is meant to support mixed uses, staff made the recommendation to turn water taxis from conditional to permitted. And the LPA agreed with that. Eco housing. Elderly cottage housing opportunity. In current article, LDC section 90201D, this language allows for an ADU to be constructed on any zoning district, any lot across the city whether or not an ADU is allowed, so long as it can meet the setbacks. Density isn't even considered. As long as it can meet the dimensional limitations for setbacks and height, an ADU is outright permitted, so long as it is for elderly housing. Obviously, that creates a bit of an issue when it comes to, well, what happens once the elderly vacate? Now, this house, say in the LDRV, which does not allow for ADUs, has an ADU. Kind of just opens up the Pandora's box on the ability to start renting, because it's been permitted and it's been an approved building. And so staff recommended and the LPA concurred that that language just be removed completely, because it completely ignores use and dimensional limitations, or density limitations of the zoning district. Moving on to ADUs and guest houses. This one had quite a bit more discussion at the LPA level. Right now, ADUs, you can have an ADU up to 1,200 square feet, and a guest house up to 1,000 square feet. Generally though, when it comes to ADUs in the planning world, you have a percentage of the primary home that you can have up to a maximum of. And so staff recommended that there be a 50% maximum based on the size of the primary dwelling up to 1,200 square feet. The LPA discussed this. They wanted a little more information as to number of ADUs, how big of an issue that might this be, the average square footage, the smallest and the largest, and then how many ADUs have been requested over the last 2-3 years. So the number of ADUs approved last year was 8. The average square foot was 870. The largest being 1,155 square feet, the smallest being 574. There are 5 in the CBN, Crystal Beach neighborhood, and 3 in the Bay Estates. Based on that information, the LPA recommended to reduce the size of ADUs to 50% of the primary home up to 1,000 square feet. So it's reducing the maximum from 12,000 to, from 1,200 to 1,000, or 50%, whichever is less. Yep. All right. So those were the topics that were discussed at the public meetings, or the joint session with the LPA and council. Through other discussions at the LPA, there were other topics that were discussed, and specifically the issue of front yard setbacks were brought up. Currently, across the board in residential districts, there is a 20-foot front yard setback. Okay, depending on where you land on the spectrum of urban design, organic design, original community building and development from back in the day, 20 feet may fall just right, or it may be too much. A lot of communities are finding that because of that setback along residential streets, it opens up a corridor, a view corridor that makes it very wide and unobstructed, which gives a perception that driving through that residential district can be fast. Okay? The closer buildings are, the closer elements are to a street, the smaller the corridor gets, the slower drivers get. Okay? So also looking back at the original development of residential districts, kind of as the population boom happened in the 40s, 50s, and 60s in America. Before then, houses were very close to the streets because cars weren't really a big thing then. So where did the 20 feet come from? I don't know specifically the answer. I have an idea, and I'll tell you. I think it came from cars. You park a car in a driveway, how much do you really need before that car hits that or gets, touches the home, right? 20 feet. Most passenger cars these days are 20 feet. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they were a lot longer. I remember my first family station wagon was the Ford Gran Torino. I looked it up recently. I think it was a 26-foot long white station wagon. The front end alone was 8 feet long practically. So you would need a very big driveway for that. Okay. Nowadays, while vehicles are bigger, a lot of people drive big pickup trucks, you still don't need the 20 feet for the primary building structure. So in discussion with the LPA, LPA talked about, well, how can we give a little more to residents while also maintaining the need for vehicle parking, okay? Some communities have adopted a 10-foot front yard setback, except where there is vehicle use, such as a garage or a driveway for vehicles, right? That portion of the building needs to be set back 20 feet. So you at least have one parking space for a vehicle and then the garage. Or if it's just a driveway all the way back, they'll build it to however what they need, but there needs to still be 20 feet for a vehicle. Our parking requirement dimension right now is 19 feet deep, 9 feet wide. So 20 feet gives you that plenty of space for that vehicle, for that parking space. So what does the 10-foot, the extra 10 foot towards the street give you? Well, puts more eyes on the street. There's a theory in urban planning called public safety through urban design. The more eyes you get on a street, the safer a street's gonna be. Well, you get buildings closer to the street, people hang out in buildings, right? So there are gonna be more eyes on the street. Again, also, as I discussed, the closer the buildings are, the slower people go. So there's a significant increase in public safety that can be had with this decrease in front yard setback. So through all that discussion, the LPA made a recommendation to staff to reduce all residential zoning district front yard setbacks to 10 feet, except where those vehicle use areas are, garages, driveways, and all that. So it would be 10 feet for the primary area of the building, and then any garage or vehicle use area would have a 20-foot setback. Currently in the draft right now that you probably have seen, those numbers have not been updated. The main reason is it will take a significant effort for staff to make those changes. And if staff made those changes, it would be, and the city council didn't agree with that, it would be a whole lot of wasted staff time. So staff is waiting on this discussion and then any sort of direction that we get at a public meeting to make those changes yay or nay. If it's a nay, 20-foot setback will remain. The charts and everything, the graphics will remain the same. If it does change, those charts and those graphics will be updated. Next one, and the common boundary buffer, since being here at the city myself for 3 years, has been one of the bigger topics with people, with residents. Partly because it is fairly unique and can cause problems for not just short-term rentals, but also long-term residents as well.
We can start making it go back and forth if you need a break.
What's that?
We can start talking back and forth if you need a break.
No, I just need a quick sip. All right, so in essence, the common boundary buffer goes along the sides of properties in residential districts and the rear. And it's a 5-foot buffer from the property line inward, down the side of your yard, and then the back of your yard, okay? There's a front perimeter landscape buffer that is also 5 feet in residential districts, but that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about the common boundary buffer when you're next to adjacent residential districts to the side and the rear, or your neighbor. Essentially, this area allows for no development other than landscaping. And therefore, it provides a 10-foot buffer between properties at the end of the day. Buffers are a method in planning and construction and development that generally are used to separate more intense uses from less intense uses. So the more intense use is the one supposed to provide that buffer. Well, what we're talking about here is the same use, residential uses, okay? So why would we necessarily need to buffer same uses from each other when there's already a 7.5-foot side yard setback from the property, providing for a 15-foot separation between primary structures? So there already is a built-in buffer, essentially. It's just there's just no landscape requirement within the setback. So of the 7 substantive comments that staff has received on the comment form from the public, currently on the draft LDC, 3 of them concern the common boundary buffer. And they all said that it's very onerous on long-term renters, or long-term residents, because it reduces their ability to actually build what they want to build, okay? If you remember back, think to a really old neighborhood that you've walked through in the past. For me, it's Washington Park, Colorado, Denver, Colorado. Gorgeous pre-war neighborhood, right? Has the alleys in the back. Houses are way up on the street. And if there's a driveway, it's right on the property line. And it leads back to the little shed that was in the back that was converted to a garage for the car, okay? There is no buffer, right? And that's what people want when they're building their forever home here. They want the ability to maximize their house space on their lot and then utilize the side yard to park their car. The unintended consequence of this requirement has created what we see now in Crystal Beach. It's kind of a staple now in Crystal Beach, is the mini parking lot in front of these short-term rentals, because we do not allow cars to be parked down the side. So now there are 8 cars right up front in front of these gorgeous multi-million-dollar homes, and throughout this entire gorgeous neighborhood that's kind of a gem of the area. Besides the harbor, I think Crystal Beach is probably one of the more attractive areas for this city. I remember when I first came here, Crystal Beach was like, oh man, I want to live here. It's a neat little beach community, okay? But you can't get, a lot of the people that are wanting to move here and live here long term can't build what they really want to build because of this common boundary buffer. And so, all that being said, the LPA asked staff to not necessarily get rid of the common boundary buffer, but to develop alternatives to it. So you have the option, okay? So you can either keep the common boundary buffer 5 feet on either side and build what it is that you want to build, or if you want to put your driveway down the side, like what used to happen a lot, you take what would be required, say it's 1,000 square feet of buffer that's being taken up by this driveway. You would take that 1,000 square feet and bank it to the front of your house. And now that area can no longer become anything but open space on your property. So it's just taking what would exist there because of the common boundary buffer and putting it elsewhere on the lot while allowing people to develop their lot in a manner that they truly want to develop it in. So LPA made that recommendation to staff. Staff developed those regulations, and you can see it in what will come to you at a later date in Article 6, Section 60802. However, Article 6 is posted online currently, and anyone can go take a look at what was developed and recommended for approval by the LPA in Article 6. Tandem parking. So the tandem parking discussion came up because of the common boundary buffer. Right now, in residential uses, you cannot park more than 2 cars deep. So because you have to be able to get one car out without moving more than one vehicle out, which again has created that whole mini parking lot in front of those homes throughout all Crystal Beach. For commercial uses, you can't do more than 3 deep, but it also has to come with valet parking. So there really is no issue there, okay? So if you get rid of, or you allow for that option of the driveway along one side of the property, we also have to allow or get rid of the tandem parking requirement or limitation, okay? Not only does it cause a problem for development of residential districts, it's also kind of a pain to enforce per code enforcement, because it's for required parking only. So say you're required to have 6 spaces per your use, because you have 6, let's use a short-term rental as the example here. Say you have 6 bedrooms, therefore you require 6 spaces, all right? But you develop your property where you have the 6 bedrooms, but you provide 8 parking spaces, okay? Well, only 6 of those spaces are beholden to the tandem limitation. Therefore, you can park 6 2 deep, and then 2 can be in front of or up against whatever, but it would be 3 deep for those 2. But those two parking spaces that are not required are not beholden to the tandem parking space requirement, because they're not required parking spaces. The tandem parking is for required parking only, okay? So there's that enforcement issue with that. But also the issue of if you're allowing for someone to build in the common boundary buffer and they need 6 cars, they need to be able to park 6 cars down the side, that driveway down the side, so. All right, so those are all discussion topics either at a public meeting, workshop, or with the LPA. These 2 right here are additions since the LPA recommendation, and they're at the behest of city attorney. And those have to do with state statute requirements, specifically 2 home occupations and conditional temporary uses, okay? So home occupations are regulated at a state level. We are required to allow home occupations in any residential district. And the added language in the current draft clarifies that by basically adopting the state statute and putting it into our LDC for home occupations. And those can be found in the supplemental design standards of Article 4. Melding conditional and temporary. Conditional temporary uses. Currently, there are no provisions that exist for emergency or unique situations. For example, the addition of temporary occupation of an RV, right? There are requirements for medical purposes. If someone does have a legitimate medical requirement to not live in a home or to be able to provide some place for respite in a temporary shelter or temporary use on their property, we as a municipality are obligated to allow that. So this conditional temporary use section provides for specifically the temporary occupation of an RV, but is designed to add other uses in the future if those uses are identified. That's the end of kind of the discussion topics that we have had over the course of the draft LDC through public meetings, workshops, and comments. And the rest of these slides is the comparative analysis presentation that staff presented to the LPA concerning the consolidation of the zoning districts. So let's just stop there. If we need a break, we can take a break. Got
No
questions?
break. We got questions, though, I'm sure.
I know y'all got questions. Y'all are great at questions. All right. So
Perhaps we should have gone section by section, back and forth.
That's fine, it's fine.
I'll take the fault on that, but you were halfway through when I was like, oh man, there's a lot here.
And I apologize. I should have said, stop me at any time if you got questions, so my
Okay.
apologies on that.
Do we, yeah, I guess if we want to, I know the public is behind
your meeting, Mayor.
I know, yeah, we're shooting from the hip right now. Yes, I think since we've gotten that first portion done, I'd like to open it for the public.
Okay.
And then if we need to go, to keep us in order, back from the top, and we'll go discussion-based through, and now that we've had one swing at the full project, we can just go back and take on the topics based on the slides that are presented, and that way we'll have at least an order. All right, so at this
Sounds like a
point-
plan.
Yep, all right, so you can take a couple seconds. All right, so anyone from the public that wish to speak before we start going through the slides you just saw in the presentation?
Council members, Jason Belcher, 147 Cybert. Just want to say that I've had some follow-up with the city. I think I emailed each one of you some concerns I had. And granted, reading the proposed documents and the slides was not nearly as hard as loan documents, but it was a little confusing for me at times. I think we've got them answered. I think there is going to be changes where the short-term rentals that could possibly be in the CMU and the CMUV would be conditioned and not permitted. And that I had some concerns about possible liquor store sales, not liquor being served at restaurants or anything like that, but alcohol sales, alcohol stores in the CMU, CMV, at the proximity of 2 cemeteries, church, library, 2 parks, might not be a good idea, and I think those have been addressed. So I'm going to just say thank y'all very much. Appreciate everybody's time who listened and responded, but I think Steve's took care of most of my questions, so thank y'all.
All right, thank you, Jason. All right, anyone else? Yep, Sandy?
It's off kilter. Sandy Trammell, Indian Trail, Destin. I was just concerned about the parking. I know I harp on parking all the time, but I think the parking requirements for Crystal Beach and those areas should be totally different than the village. So I don't think one fits all in that regard. Especially, and I came up here the other night about the subdivision that was being built, and they have their 20 feet in front of their garage, and that supplies parking for the tenants. It does not supply additional parking. We haven't talked about additional parking anywhere in development. So I think that needs to be looked at too. That's all I had.
All right, thank you so much. All right, anyone else? All right, seeing none, I think call you back up and we'll bring the slides back up to the top. That way at least everyone online can follow along. And we will just stay on the topic of the slide and we'll hash it out. Hopefully we can just come from our perspectives of what we're looking for and our boundaries.
Do we want to go all the way back to language, format, and all that, or
No,
just
no,
the
no, let's get into
discussion
the meat.
topics?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll get into the,
All right,
the veggies.
perfect. All right, first one, parking for outdoor seating. Go.
all right. I mean, so right now we're at a 50% outdoor
That
requirement.
is the
for
recommendation
trail.
from the LPA, is 50% of what would be required for indoor will be required for outdoor seating by square footage.
Councilman Destin, you going in or?
Steve, did you review with them what the current code says?
The current code is 0.
Zero.
There is no parking requirement for outdoor seating currently.
All right. Councilman
This would
Destin.
be an increased parking
This would
requirement.
be
Correct.
increased. Councilman Destin, seeing that you have a restaurant. It's an illusion. I actually have no power.
Okay. At the moment, we have 0 requirements, and there was a rationale behind that. Festive Village Marketplace, that was one of our themes, and I think it still is part of one of our themes that said we want people outdoors. And to encourage them to have outdoor seating, we're not going to include it in the parking. The other reason behind it was, at the time, our multimodal parking scheme required that we have parking structures, whether they be surface lots whether they be multi-story. And in order to make sure that those things actually did not go deeply in the hole, we didn't want to require the parking to be on site for these outdoor uses. We wanted them to have to park in the public parking structures. Now, maybe I've missed something. Have we changed that? We still, family built a restaurant about 6 months ago, and we still were held to the maximum parking allowed. In other words, we were not allowed to have but so many spaces. So until we get rid of that maximum parking allowed, which was driven by force people into parking garages, I'm not sure that this isn't counterproductive. Where do we stand on maximum parking allowed in our scheme from 20 years ago to force people to use parking garages that never were built, although we did do surface lots? Where do we stand on changing maximum back to minimum, which is where we were before?
Yep, so, great question. So based on discussion and previous guidance, the multimodal transportation district as a district is gonna go away, with the exception of the really good design standards that are in it. The maximum parking requirement, which says you cannot have more parking than what would be required at 100%, but also provided for that 20% reduction of what is required, is not on the table anymore. That's been removed from any draft language here in the LDC based on guidance given to staff.
Okay, that's on the new that we're talking about now, because it was
Correct.
certainly still in effect about 6 months
It's
ago.
it's currently in effect, yes, because it's still on the books. We have granted, well, not we, the Board of Adjustment has granted variances for that, to allow for more parking. But in general, the guidance given to staff was to get rid of that requirement with this new draft.
And that's in this draft?
Correct, yes, sir.
Okay, another question I have is, it appears we're trying to take the parking standard that goes with buildings, a parking space for each 100 square feet, and apply it to outdoor parking, and I don't know how that can work, especially if it's seating in courtyards, or seating in areas that do not have a structure around them. How do we measure? I would suggest that if we go forward with this, a better standard would be parking that's tied to seating outdoor, because there are no directions and there is no standard how to measure the outdoor.
Is
That I
the
can
current
find.
restaurant parking standard based off square footage or seating?
Gross floor area.
Okay, yeah, so if nothing changes, staff would just kind of take a look at what's being proposed for outdoor seating and measure out an area. But if there's a better thought to that, we can certainly talk about, give us your proposed seating layout, how many seats do you intend, right? And then base the parking requirement off of
Yeah,
that.
and I would argue that measuring outdoor where there are no walls and no barriers
Yep.
is darn near impossible, because I'm gonna say my area is this size and you can say it's that size, and with no guidance, who's right? So we definitely need to look at that before we implement this. Otherwise, I don't know how we could rationally or logically measure outdoor seating other than the number of seats. Now, the problem is with outdoor seating, which is temporary, that could change on a daily basis. So, I think we need to look at this issue hard and see if we want to move away from the outdoor festive marketplace that the outdoor seating was supposed to promote. 50% might be right, and we need to move away from the maximum parking to the minimum, because then at least those two concepts go together. So I've still got some pretty strong questions about that issue.
May I suggest something?
Yeah.
So, since, we do have that special festive marketplace in the harbor area.
Right.
You can regulate differently by zoning district.
Right.
So if zoning districts in the festive marketplace, you want to, say you don't want 50%, but 25% seems appropriate, but everywhere else is 50%,
Exactly.
that's certainly something that can be done.
Yeah, and I would suggest that we look at it very closely to come up with something that fits the district, because the outdoor seating, of course, is an integral part of down on the harbor district, not only in the structures and around the structures, but I might point out, we have outdoor seating on our harbor easement, which of course is not supposed to happen, but we do in fact have it. So if I put my outdoor seating on my harbor easement, does it count? another question we need to figure out. But anyway,
Just for quick clarity, so you're okay with the gross square footage of the structure for parking requirements on restaurants? You would just like to take a look at this based on seating, what you propose to provide per seating for outdoor seating,
and if
correct?
it's even appropriate to put this standard down in the harbor in the festive
Okay.
marketplace.
Staff will take that look at that and bring something back at the public meeting.
Okay, and that was my question on that.
All right, good deal. Councilman Galley, you still got something? Yes, sir. All right.
Mine's going to be controversial, and it usually is, and I'm sure I'm going to upset some people, but I enjoy a coffee shop that was just built down on Mountain Drive in Benning. I think it's a great place. Tremendous amount of outdoor seating. I see people going down Benning, trying to find a parking spot in other lots. There's no sidewalks from Benning to this coffee shop. There's sidewalks on Mountain Drive, but I think we have a safety issue out there if we don't regulate some of this outdoor seating, especially per district. Now, if we do it per district where it's accommodable, where we have parking, where we have sidewalks, where we have safe trespass, or passage from point A to point B, I can understand, but I almost feel like it should be 100% for anything as the rule, and then we can make that determination based off district or based off safety provisions that we see where they're planning to put that business or utilize that outdoor seating. But I just feel like eventually there's going to be an accident or somebody's going to get hurt, or I can foresee this becoming a problem that we can't get our hands around if we're not careful.
Yeah, I'd second that and dive in that. I think the parking require minimal versus the maximum, and allowing it to either have everything on site, or if there is a parking space or public parking nearby and we see it as deemable in that festive place. I just would like to see this become a little bit more, less parking lot and a little bit more commercial spaces in the festive places.
Yep. So if you haven't dived into Article 6 yet, which is the general design standards, the staff has, in discussion with the LPA and others, talked about changing the off-site parking requirement and allowances. And right now, it's a straight line distance rather than a closest sidewalk network distance, which can cause some issues. So I think a lot of these issues that you're bringing up, Mr. Guile and Mayor, may be mitigated a little bit with that new language and the allowance for off-site parking within a certain distance if you have that proper network. We also did add language in there that if there is no network or if there's gaps in the network and you want to do this, you have to fill in the gap. So if there's sidewalk missing in between your off-site and your primary use, you have to build that in order to take advantage of it.
Well, these parking spots aren't necessarily off-site. It's people parking wherever they can find a
Yeah,
spot.
yeah. And
Let me just jump in for 1 second. So if we're going to talk about specific properties, just as a whole, not referring to any specific property, if you all pass code amendments, existing developments are not going to be held to those standards. They're going to become, this is just for the whole council, Tori, I see you trying to jump in, but they will be legal non-conforming uses. So they'll be existing unless they want to expand, and then the code would provide for a process for them to come up to compliance with the current code. So no particular property would change based on the LDC rewrite. It would be for redevelopment or new development. And then what Steve is saying about the off-site parking, that particular property, you're talking about on-site parking. He's saying that the additional new regulations for off-site parking will in the future allow people to include off-site parking in their plans that staff reviews, as long as they provide those sidewalks and other necessary elements. So that off-site parking option will provide future developments options that they don't currently have, right?
Correct, yeah, and I was going to get to that point about the legal nonconformity on existing uses. There's just, at this point in time, there's can't do anything about it since they're
No,
already
no, and I
approved,
don't
so-
want to, I'm not attacking existing companies
Yeah.
or existing businesses. What I'm looking at is the future.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
If it gets out of hand, and it could foreseeably get out of hand based off what we see there. And I understand exactly what you're saying. If they're allowing or assigning an off-site parking, but in this case, they're not assigning an off-site parking. People just don't have a place to park, so they're finding anywhere they can.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they're occupying other business parking lots.
Yep.
And that egress is not there. It's
Yeah.
not present.
And with the removal of the 20% reduction in the MMTD and the removal of the maximum will help mitigate that as well, like we just discussed, because that particular situation that you're talking about is in the MMTD. So,
Hey, Councilman Destin, back to you.
And that kind of answers the question I was going to ask you about. If there are plans for the off-site parking, we're going to reduce the distance, not expand it, I would hope.
correct, yeah, so, yeah, right now, I can't remember the exact number, but instead of using that number, where it's just a straight line distance, I think it's 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet linear based on the pedestrian network. So
And that's an awful long ways. And
it is right now. I think the straight line distance is like 2,500
Oh, is it
feet.
really
It's
that
pretty
long?
it's pretty big. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty intense. 1,500 at the end of the day, when you're talking from a professional planning standpoint, it's pretty standard. 1,000 is also. I honestly cannot remember exactly what was recommended, but it's in that range. And it from a staff standpoint, from a professional standpoint, it significantly provides a better product for people who, not only the developers and the business owner, because it provides that infrastructure for their users, but it also provides that infrastructure and a better experience for their patrons.
And Mr. Giles is right. If it's very far away, they're going to do their best to park.
Yep.
And we have that.
Nothing's
problem.
going to change that.
We have that problem in spades on the harbor right now. I mean,
Yep.
we have parking lots across the street, we have parking lots next door. They're not gonna use them if they have to walk another 15 feet.
Yep.
So that's a citywide issue.
All right, Councilman Stevens.
Thanks. So I don't know if this would be related or not, but I've always thought there's an issue with the shared parking. And since we're kind of talking about parking off-site and all that, and is that part of this article?
No, not part of Article 4, that's going to be Article 6.
Okay.
Yep. But whatever questions you have, please let us know, and we can, staff can point you to the section to read, so that you're better prepared for Article 6.
Councilman Schmidt?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
On shared parking, when that comes, definitely want to keep in mind of shared parking today on my plan and how that can change in 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months when the businesses change hours and change from coffee to alcohol or whatever. So just
Yep,
food for thought in the future.
that is a fight that we're currently
Oh, I can only
doing,
imagine, so keep that in mind. Yeah, outdoor parking, I know many people that, they know that rule, right? They know this rule in Destin, and they use it to their advantage as much as they possibly can.
It's on the books.
Because it's on the books. So yeah, I'm definitely in support of trying to increase that number. 100% is probably pretty tough. Mr. Gile, I mean, it's, 50, 100%. Not saying I wouldn't do that in some areas, which I do like the idea of different districts. So for example, maybe staff looks at what is around that district, right? So if CMUV area has our parks and has our parking lot, on that side, maybe that area closer is a lower percentage because there's more public spots, but somewhere else, in Crystal Beach area or somewhere else where we don't have more public, things, and then we force the owner, the developer to make sure they have more parking spots there.
Absolutely.
Type of thing. So, because, and I like the idea about potential outdoor seating area, right? So kind of like how I think we've recently made construction plan and the parking plan for construction have to be provided. I mean, to me, you should provide what your plan is for outdoor seating. Yes, the number of seats could change on a day-to-day basis, weather, whatever else, but I think it should be, this is my designated area for outdoor seating, and this is where I'm gonna have seating, because that's where the seating should be, not around every single little corner on walkways and walk paths and things like that. You know, and try to squeezing them in different areas. I think it should be a designated square footage area that's actually on a map. Whether they choose to maximize that whole area or not would be up to them, but I think it should be designated when they submit the request, the permit. So that was my only question on the parking one.
Awesome.
I heard the harbor boardwalk easement area, and I think inferring from what you just said, you might have been talking about that as well. Included in Article 6 as well is a new harbor boardwalk easement development standard that some of it exists currently in the LDC, but it's just so buried that it's very easy to miss. And so we've included that in Article 6 now too, with some modifications based on current issues that we are finding on the harbor boardwalk.
All right, great. All right, seeing none on that. LSVs, short-term rental, LSV parking, anything on that? Councilman Babb, if you want to take it away, if you got something.
I just want to clarify, because what I thought we had agreed in the joint hearing was a license plate is a license plate. So if you've got 6 parking spots you have to have, okay, and you've got your 6 parking spots, if you park an LSV there, that's one of them.
Yep.
Okay, I
Yep.
just want to.
That is exactly it. Yes.
Okay.
And that's how it is currently.
My only other note from that, wasn't brought up, is LSV company register BTRs. Can you decipher my notes?
LSV.
Having a BTRs, do we
Yeah,
do we
any
require BTRs for the LSVs?
For the LSV specifically?
Yes.
I don't know if one individual is renting an LSV as a business, then that business would have the BTR, but the LSV itself would not.
Okay.
So if there's a company out there that's renting LSVs, the company would have
Has
the
their
BTR,
one
right?
BTR.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly, yes, yeah.
Okay.
So right now we have you have the livery operator registration, right? But then you have a registration for each livery, right? That's separate from specific individual LSVs.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
All right, Councilman Destin?
A question that might be for Ms. Kopp. We are talking about short-term rentals here, correct? And under state law, are we allowed to have a different standard of parking for short-term rentals versus single-family residential zones?
Yeah, as of today, as of this past legislative session, yes, I don't know what they'll do next time, but right now, the only thing we can't do is regulate the frequency, the duration of a short-term rental, or prohibit it in the residential zoning districts unless we already had that in place prior to 2011. So we would be good, and we already do treat parking differently today in our code.
Okay, and of course, one of our major banes is short-term rental in single-family resident areas. So we're leaving it parking standard at 1 per bedroom. Would it be legal for us to say 2 for bedroom or 3 for bedroom? Because some of these bedrooms are bunk rooms that they're using. And the point I'm making is, throughout this, it appears that we are trying to make it easier and accommodate short-term rentals where they have been what has caused us an awful lot of problem. And
So the 1 per bedroom was a fairly recent council change, not recent to this council, but I think it was around
2016.
2016, all right. I interposed the 9 and the 6, but 2016, we started doing the 1 per bedroom for short-term rentals. If we want to increase it, we can. Of course, it won't apply to the existing, but when they redevelop
But
it
it
will.
will apply to ones that want to build now, which
Correct.
are still
Yep,
happening.
or anybody that does a change of use or that's going to become a short-term rental that's not currently one, it would apply.
Exactly. So, you know, that's a decision for the council to make. Do we want to really have any handle on short-term rentals within the city limits or not? You know, it's cuts both ways. Sometimes the economic impact is very important, and I think it probably is important to Destin. On the other hand, preservation of single-family residential areas is also important. So that's one we can think about.
If I may, about this particular one, because when we brought this back to the LPA after the public workshop, there seemed to be a little bit of confusion on this specific topic. Staff's intent was not to decrease any sort of parking requirement or say that only LSVs can park here. It was to maintain the one parking space per bedroom, and whether you park an LSV or a vehicle in there or not is up to you, but require an additional specific LSV spot. I don't know if that was confusion amongst you all, but that seemed to be a little bit of a confusion at the LPA. So it would be, if you have 8 bedrooms, you still required to do the 8 parking spaces, but also require the one extra LSV space on site. So I just needed to provide that real quick.
That part real easy. The question is, do we want to regulate or not?
Yep.
STRs.
Yep.
Because you can certainly do it through parking until the state legislature tells us we can't.
Yep.
Right, Councilman Bagby.
Yeah, and that, y'all have done a great job.
Thank you.
You really have. And this chapter in particular is a lot to chew through. But what we have, in essence, is a dichotomy here where we treat, because we have a short-term rental ordinance, oh, that's one per bedroom. But other places, it's square footage. And at some point, and this gets into the point I've been making about, we got, one of my outcomes I would like to see from this process is to get out of the integrity check business, okay? Where a developer comes and says, only got 2 bedrooms, need 4 parking spots. Yeah, it's a 4,000 square foot house, but that's a mudroom, and that's a library, and that's an outdoor, you know, cinema thing, and this is a, no, it's 4,000 square feet, here's how many parking spots you gotta have if you're in a residential area, okay? And so, but to do that, we have to pull the short-term rental ordinance out and go, okay, how do we either incorporate this or just get rid of it and put it in the LDC? And that's kind of what I'm depending on y'all, but the 1 car per bedroom or the 1 vehicle per bedroom, that doesn't work for me. I'm just gonna be honest with you, because they're gonna have, I can show you some houses out in Crystal Beach, they got 6 bedrooms, advertising as 6 bedrooms, but because of the way either they got in before the short-term rental ordinance or because of the way the plans were approved, they got 4 parking spots. And so it's like, you got 4 parking spots with 6 bedrooms that you're advertising on, you know. So I just want us to get where we get away from the 1 parking spot per bedroom and get into the, you got 5,000 square feet? Here's how many parking spots you got. I don't care if you put bunk beds in all 5,000 square feet. This is how many parking spots you gotta have. But we're kind of caught in this trap of the short-term rental ordinance, and we need to figure out how to work our way out of that.
Well, since we've moved from the parking table in Article 8 and tying the parking specifically to the use in Article 4, we can certainly say, you know, for single-family, long-term residential uses, this square footage is required, or maintain it at 2 per, you know, single-family dwelling or whatever. And then for short-term rental, we can certainly say, you know, minimum X plus 1 per 1,000 square feet, or, you know, whatever a bedroom is. Is that something that you would like to consider or see?
That's, and I'm just one, but that is how I want us to figure out. We've got the short-term rental ordinance and we got the LDC here, and they're separate, and they're, you know, it's like one doesn't relate to the other one hardly. And so I want, with respect to parking, I want to see where, you know, it's all captured in the LDC, and if the developer says, I'm putting in a 4,000 square foot house, but it's only got 2 bedrooms, that's great, you gotta have 8 parking spots.
Yep.
Have a nice day.
Yeah, so moving forward, if adopted, the LDC would reign for any new short-term rental development. The old ordinance would remain for, you know, the ones that were developed. So it's certainly, it can certainly be tied up into the LDC, the new LDC, but we're still dealing, like we talked about with parking for existing uses just a moment ago, we're still dealing with the legal non-conforming. So, staff will definitely take a look at that and hopefully provide something that is to council's liking when it comes back.
Kim, do you have something to that?
Nope, not unless you have a question, but I'm understanding that you want it all in one place.
Yeah. I
So-
don't want, because that's the whole intent of the rewrite is we're gonna put it all in one document, and it's
Yep.
like I'm a developer and I get your LDC and I've read your LDC and I comply with your LDC, and then all of a sudden you come to me and say, oh, that's not approved because we have a short-term rental ordinance, or we have a this ordinance, or we have a that ordinance, and no, the whole purpose of this rewrite is to put,
Right, and we have the same issue with the livery vessels.
Yes.
Because the registration for liveries and short-term rentals are in the same place in the Code of Ordinances. So I'm just getting the sense that at least one council member, maybe more, because some people are nodding, would like to see all of that in the LDC.
Yep, and that's how it currently is, so.
Councilman Gallo?
Yep.
Yep.
I'm kind of on the fence on this one because I see both sides. And as a little story, I sold a 5-bedroom house at Miramar Beach, rented the people at a restaurant. They asked me to come unlock the AC for them because it had a lock system so you could lock out a kid, and they forgot the code, and fix their garbage disposal. When I went in there, even though it's a 5-bedroom house and it had a family room and a living room, they boarded up the family room and turned it into a 3-bedroom house or room. They add an additional 3 bedrooms to that room. So at that point, according to the LDC, does that become an 8-bedroom? And now they're allowed X amount more vehicles
Yeah.
because it's 8-bedroom?
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of nuance to a lot of this. So essentially, if your home was approved prior to 2016 and you changed to short-term rental prior to 2016, you're beholden to the original parking, which was, I think it was based on bedroom count.
Yeah, then I think I would go
And then
with
it changed, in 2016, the
Bagley.
short-term rental ordinance came into effect for parking. So any new short-term rental that came on, that increased the bedroom count was now required to, so if you had a 4-bedroom home prior to 2016 and you became a short-term rental after 2016 and you didn't change the bedroom count, you're able to maintain the original approved parking. If you added 1 bedroom to that 4-bedroom post 2016, now you're beholden to the 1 space per bedroom, okay? If you develop a brand new home currently, you're beholden to the 1 space per bedroom, okay?
You
So-
can't go into the home and check, so you don't know if they've added.
Well, we run into this a lot where people will remodel their garage without putting a building permit in. Or they'll do exactly what you said. They have a massive playroom or massive living room, family room, and they'll change it without a building permit to a bedroom. If they come through for any changes to the home from what the original approval is, they are beholden to the current regulations. So in that example where you're talking about, they had 5 bedrooms, but then they converted the living room to 3. If they come through for a building permit, they would be beholden to the 1
Oh, they
space per
did. I
bedroom.
can guarantee you
Yeah.
they did. And I can tell by the construction they did.
Well, yeah. You said it was in Miramar, so.
Right, it was
yeah.
Miramar, but I mean,
yeah.
if it's happening there, it's happening here.
Yeah, and we do run into that from time to time, especially when people realize they go from self-management to a management company, and then the management company knows they have to go through, they currently don't have the BTR registration, right? So they go through the BTR, and then they know they have to do the short-term rental registration. So they go through all that. Staff in the planning division receives that, and is like, oh, well, this hasn't gone through a change of use yet. So then we require the change of use process to go through, and then we analyze, okay, you had 4 bedrooms originally back in, say, 2010. Now you're telling me you have 8, and we have no record of that? What happened, right? Obviously, they didn't put in a building permit. So the change of use process would capture that change, would require them to come into compliance with building code by submitting a building permit, if approvable, by showing that they can meet the 1 space per bedroom requirement for the short-term rental. If they can't, we can't approve the building permit in the planning division because they're wanting to change to a short-term rental, so we can't approve the change of use, nor can we approve the building permit because they don't meet the parking requirement. So there are ways that we do capture it, but it's all predicated on the fact that people are doing what's supposed to be done by submitting a building permit.
Right, and that we don't make mistakes in that process,
And
potentially.
everyone's human, right?
Which
So
I hate to-
sometimes it happens, but
I hate to say
unfortunately.
this, but I
yeah.
feel like Councilman Bagby's option seems to capture it either way.
Oh, boy, can we, Chris?
You know, I hate to agree, but I have to agree.
Oh, man, one more time for the audience in the back. All right, good deal. Anything else on that? I'm zeroed out here.
One quick question, Mayor, and so I understand where we're going. The square footage would apply to all housing, single family, not just SDR?
I mean, if I get a nod from everyone to say, take a look at that stuff, we will. We can certainly do that. Certainly.
That's what it is now.
Okay.
Right? Is that what it is now?
No, currently it's if you have a single family long-term dwelling unit, it's 2 spaces, period, no matter the size.
Which is the point I'm making. If
Yep.
we try to capture all those guys, we're probably
Yeah.
they're gonna get out the pitchforks.
Yeah,
And-
prior to the current short-term rental, it was based on bedroom count.
Yep.
But it changed to just 2 for long-term, and then short-term it was 1 per bedroom.
And is it even necessary in subdivisions that have homeowners associations? Probably not. They're already gonna regulate it. That's, so we need to be careful about what we do if we capture everybody. That's gonna be probably controversial and perhaps not right, because they are single-family homes. They're not short-term rentals, and they're not causing the problem.
All options are on the table. Staff will bring back something that can be molded and applied to either or different for each. And then whatever the will of the council is, staff will make those changes and bring that draft back.
I'll be pretty unhappy with having to provide 8 parking spaces. Darn near impossible.
All right, good deal. All right, bike parking, probably a light one, said 0 to 20, we're compromising as 10. Anyone have any?
The 20% was minimal, it's very few uses, and it was pretty much inconsequential. And like I said earlier, 10% is pretty standard across the planning profession, so.
Yeah, and I'd point out the bicycle spaces we put in at the restaurants, at most, they're being used 10%. I don't even think they're being used 10%, except for my employees who can't drive their cars anymore.
Yeah, and there's a reason why the 10% is applicable because of that. So when I was going through my undergrad, NACTO did a big study. There's a 1.2% of the population that will ride their bike anytime, anywhere. We've discussed this before. I ride my bike across the Mid-Bay Bridge from time to time to get to work. I'm one of those. I don't care. You hit me, it's my time to go, okay? There's a missing middle of about 95% of people that are interested, but know that it's not the safest bet in the world, unless the infrastructure is provided. And the mobility plan is one of those plans for our future that will help kind of build towards that infrastructure to allow people to. But at the end of the day, even in communities that are very bicycle friendly, 10% is about the max that you get.
Yeah, and to your point on that, I would say, especially for our mobility plan, without getting into a different topic, looking at that quarter or half mile, like if we're if we're trying to prioritize that list, maybe it's, all right, how many groups of people are in that 5-10 minute walk to these festive marketplaces, and do we have those connection points? So, yeah, I agree with that. All right, off-site parking, I believe is next. Is that right?
No.
No. Oh,
Tattoo, permanent
tattoos,
making.
okay, yep. That's number 6. Hey, yeah, oh, my bad, hey, yes. My fiance likes tattoos. Oh, we need a break? All right, we'll do. All right, tattoos, permanent makeup. You guys got anything, Councilman Bagby?
So, one of the things, we don't have all the definitions and stuff, and I know you talked about what the state regulation is and stuff, but one of my questions was, how is permanent makeup defined? If you had all our definition section in there, how is it defined in definition?
Let me grab my computer real quick. I think we have that included in the Article 4, and or in Article 11, which is the glossary.
Okay, I
That's
didn't see it in Article.
Article 4. Then it should be in Article 11.
It may be in there,
Yeah.
I mean, we're
I can
talking
grab it real
separate
quick and
things.
take a look if you'd like.
If we're about to go on break, I mean, there may be something while we're on
Yeah,
break.
Maybe
you
we
can
just go
look
on
at
break
it.
and-
Well,
and-
my
and I'll pull it
concern
up.
is there a certain percentage of work, income, whatever, where it, because tattoos are permanent makeup, right? So if you say 75% of your business's income has to be through cutting hair or styling hair or shaving or, some salon-related activity as opposed to permanent makeup, I get that.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's just, I'm a tattoo parlor, and you know what I do? I get all my money from permanent makeup. So again,
yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah. Okay.
require people to do an integrity check.
Yeah.
I want us to clearly define your tattoo.
Yeah, so I believe in the supplemental design standards, permanent makeup has to be part of a personal service salon that provides those services you just talked about. There is no definition or percentage, and the glossary wouldn't identify that because another thing that we changed, and we'll discuss this when we get to the glossary, but we can do it right now, is getting rid of regulation through definition. So any required regulation should be in that supplemental design standard, whereas what is permanent makeup is in the glossary, right?
But
And-
I think you said the state defines tattoos as permanent makeup or vice versa.
Yeah, permanent makeup as tattoos, yes.
Yeah,
And that's just
so-
because of the process and the health certificates required.
I got it.
Yep.
All I'm saying is, if I'm a tattoo guy and you're telling me I can't
Mm-hmm.
go in there, now I'm a permanent makeup guy. And
Yeah.
you can't tell me different because the state says
Mm-hmm.
I'm a permanent makeup guy.
Yep.
So I just want us to, either in the definitions or somehow in here, say you have to get some, 75%
Okay.
or whatever of activities have to generate your revenue that include hair care or something.
Yeah, we can certainly
Not
add.
just permanent makeup.
Sure.
And not just, because then every tattoo parlor is a permanent
Yep.
makeup.
We can certainly add that type of language into the supplemental design standard for permanent makeup, so.
Isn't that similar to like alcohol licenses?
That's,
Things
I
like so,
was gonna make that exact
similar to
comment.
that,
Yep.
So with us being on it, let me know if this is the wrong place for it. So we're talking about the separation distancing. Are we just talking about this as permanent makeup and tattoos or other things
It's-
you'd like to see in the
It's
separating distance?
bifurcating, what the
Yes.
request here is bifurcating permanent makeup from tattoos. Because
Yes.
currently tattoos have this separation
So
requirement.
this is a standalone
But
topic between
say, the
designating
lady
two.
down the street
Yep.
who, runs a 3-chair salon and her patrons now
Mm-hmm.
want to get permanent eyebrows, right? She's not going to go in there and, do what I have on my arm, right?
Yeah.
It's just, that's all they want is just, eyebrows.
Yep.
Right? She wants to add that as a service.
So then I guess my next-
that's what it would be intended for.
So where, would it be in this chapter if we're trying to do the same thing with storage units and car washes and other?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that'd be in the supplemental design standards.
How do we all feel about doing the separation distancing for car washes and storage units? I mean, it's election year,
Hey,
just trying to get you guys some free votes.
The slate is clean. The slate is clean, so whatever recommendations.
I'm throwing it out there, I would be in favor to see I mean, they're just they're land speculators, and I don't mind their business, it's just they're sitting on.
So what were the
low-density,
specific
low-
uses again? Storage units?
Storage
and-
units and car washes, and maybe an island that starts with an A. I don't want to say that.
That's gonna
name.
be difficult.
No, that last one's more of a joke, even though I think there's like 20 of them.
That's general retail, so that'd be really difficult.
Yeah.
I don't know why I still have the floor, but I would be in favor of that, but I want it to go to the LPA. I want the staff in the LPA to give us a definition, because it's just like the permanent makeup thing. I gave
Yeah,
you
you
an
gotta-
example, but you may say permanent makeup has to be above the shoulders or something. So it, you know, as opposed to up and down your arms or your legs or ankles or what. I don't know what the right answer is, but I know that if you tell me.
I really like that above the shoulder
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Well, I don't. Then you probably shouldn't use it.
Beauty of a workshop.
No, I think it's great.
But no, I'm just saying, I'm not smart enough to know, other than I know human nature is, if you tell me I have to be a permanent makeup person, I can be a permanent makeup person, and I can
Absolutely.
put makeup, that's makeup on your arm.
Yeah, I'm not selling liquor, I'm selling cups.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Councilman Destin?
I would just caution about the distances between all of these different businesses. I'm not sure what the legal rationale is, even for tattoos. Okay, we're gonna need distance between restaurants, hotels. I mean, we can go down the line, and at some point, it gets to be, I just don't know
Over-proliferation?
what the rationale behind it is, other than we don't like that particular business and we don't want too many of them.
I would just say the legal bounds that I'm taking would be an over-proliferation. Thank you.
And over what?
Like our criteria for conditional uses, where we say if there's an over-proliferation of uses in the zoning district, too many multifamily we have right now. It's making the same well, I think the mayor is making the same argument for car washes and, what was it, storage units.
Storage units, yeah.
Well, if we ever get around to making that over-utilization in a planning zone, then I may support the mayor as a partnership on storages and multifamily, but we've not done so well at that so far.
I only know that we don't lose in court.
Hey, Steve,
Sir?
for this to come up, we have a lot of people coming up here to the city trying to start a permanent makeup salon because.
Not start, but provide that service.
So we
And-
have actual salons in Destin that are actually trying to follow the rules and come to us and say, I
Yes.
want to add a service. Am I allowed
Yeah,
to do that?
because in order
Good for
to provide that service, they have to get their state letter signed by us
Got it. There it is.
because it's a tattoo.
Just put a chair in the salon. What are they doing? Okay, that makes sense.
So
Well,
yeah,
thank
so
you.
yeah, so
We'll take them
there
anyways.
is quite a bit. It is one of the yeah, the state requires it because it's a state certification for tattooing, and so in order to get that service provided in the salon, they need to get local zoning signatories. Currently, there's no bifurcation of the uses, and so yeah, per guidance in the past, we've bifurcated it, and this draft will just solidify that.
All right, anything else on that? Not seeing
So,
any.
real quick, just quick clarification, that whole discussion on separation, go back to the LPA, is that?
Yeah, I think so. I think we had a
I heard
couple
that.
minutes for that. I'm for it,
Yeah,
obviously.
I just want to make sure we got the best
Okay.
ideas, that
Yep.
not my idea.
I love your idea,
No,
I think it's great.
Y'all and the LPA folks, I trust to bring us well thought out
Can I take
plans.
your idea?
Yeah, you can take my idea. I don't care.
And me bringing up, I guess specifically the car washes and the storage units is only because I've been traveling over to Niceville a lot more often, and I'm seeing them be a big issue. I talked to their council, and they're obviously, we're talking about these things happen after the fact, so once we adopt this moving forward, they stop. So this isn't to remedy anything that's out there, but clearly, we're seeing them across the Gulf Coast, and I think it's people land speculating. And I
It's
would
everywhere.
prefer
It's everywhere
it to be
across
a
the
higher,
country.
better use for our community than a,
Americans like their things.
yeah, and cities are the most powerful thing. All right, with that, I will take a break so we can have our minutes taken accurately. All right, 5-minute recess. Mobile vending. I'll call the workshop to order. Take it away.
Yeah, so mobile vending, as stated earlier, there is a whole separate section dedicated to mobile vending in Article 7. Staff has since taken that section, gotten rid of it as a section, but now included mobile vending as a use, per the discussion at the public workshop and with the LPA, into the use charts per the zoning districts. And then the supplemental design standards that are required per the current section in Article 7 are now just non-residential supplemental design standards per Article 4. The direction given, or the recommendation from the LPA was to take mobile vending and whether or not it's in the zoning district, if it's a conditional use for a restaurant or permitted, that mobile vending would then become a conditional use or permitted per that, since the uses are about as similar as you can get.
Would that include mobile detailing as far as just,
No, this is specific to food vending.
okay, specifically to food? Okay, thank you. Okay, up first, Councilman Stevens?
Thank you. How does this work for like having like a mobile vendor like taking actually a parking spot? I mean, is that counted into it? Because when I was looking at it, it just mainly talked about employee parking spots.
Yeah, so in the supplemental design standard section, it comes up, it says that you can't take up required parking spaces, I believe. And you do have to provide parking for the number of employees, based on the number of employees per the vendor, has to provide that somehow, some way. So.
Okay, so it's all in there, and then
Yep.
we don't have to worry about density, so like having like multiple mobile.
So I believe currently the density is 1 per half acre with a maximum of 5. And that's in the current section. And that is also transferred into the supplemental design standards per the non-residential uses.
All right, up next, Councilman Destin.
Thank you, Mayor. Tell me about the food vending, mobile vendors that have popped up all up and down 98. Is that addressed in this? I'm trying to figure out, so they don't have to have parking preceding because they don't have seating. Do they have to have parking for the employees like you just
Yes,
discussed?
yeah, they have to be able to provide parking for their employees. Now, this is a fairly difficult issue. So the state has superseded the city from requiring any sort of extra registration, licensing, or permitting. So
Okay.
that means BTRs, that means mobile vending license that's currently in Code of Ordinances is no longer required. Nor do we have a mobile vendor registration, okay? So it's very difficult for staff to make any sort of analysis on parking requirements since we don't have that information.
Yeah.
And so really it's kind of, at that point, it's an enforcement issue. If code enforcement sees it, they go out, they take a look. Hey, Mr. Operator, how many employees do you have? Okay, where are they parking? That's essentially how it's enforced. That is captured in the supplemental design standards, but again, at the end of the day, there's nothing that the city can require to analyze, like a site plan or anything like that.
Well, if it's parked in required parking, then that would be something you could, I would think, look at.
Yes, yeah, if code goes out and says, takes a picture of it based on the site, and, staff can bring up the approved DO or whatever, the approved site plan, and say, okay, yes, every single one of these parking spaces is a required parking space, and therefore a mobile vendor cannot be located there.
So you've got a little bit of leverage, but not a lot.
Yes. Yeah, it's more of a after the fact, not a preemption or a pre-setup.
Yep.
All right, Councilman Schmidt.
Thank you. Just to continue on that first, I got, I think the end of it was those parking spots are supposed to be for cars, required parking, so that mobile food truck can't be there. But earlier you said something about code could go out there and ask how many, employees there are. But how? Because I thought we're not allowed to force them to do that.
No,
Like, so-
we can regulate the use. We just cannot require any extra licensing, registration, or documentation more than what the state requires.
So are we regulating the operator of the mobile vendor, or are we regulating the property that the mobile vendor is on?
We're regulating the use. So the use of mobile vending, right?
So we would go to the property owner then, where the mobile vending is?
Both, right? So the property owner at the end of the day ultimately is responsible for the uses going
Right.
on at their property, right? So if we go and investigate, hey, there's a mobile vendor on this site, okay, we're gonna go there. Hey, take pictures, they're taking up 3 spaces.
Right.
Staff, planning, take a look at this, right? We bring up the approved site plan, we confirm, okay, the primary use on site requires 50 parking spaces. They have 70 on site, right? So there's 20 extra, they can be located there, right? Now, how many employees do you have? Operator? I have 2. So
I get
there-
you,
yeah.
but for the people that might be moving around, things like that, that's the issue.
Yeah, it's
that makes sense.
yeah, staff's hands is fairly tied because of the state preemption.
So, people are asked about, like food truck festivals,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so one of the biggest areas that we have would be Morgan Sports Complex.
Mm-hmm.
Where does recreation zoning fit into this? Because it's not on the list, so how does that work if the city was doing that? Or
So
maybe it's not,
are you
so
asking
we-
how we could do it?
Well, I
Or
guess,
how
like,
it's
can
done?
can
Right now, it
somebody-
wouldn't be allowed. If it's a recreationally zoned property, it would not be allowed. Partly because we don't allow commercial operation in parks, okay? But with the Article 2, which is administration, will be brought to you at another workshop. There's a new process that staff has developed for special events. And based on what's being proposed, it could come to council for approval for a food truck festival at Morgan's. So there are ways to do it, it's just outright permitting it. We can't because we currently don't allow commercial activity other than the licensed vendors for those complexes through parks. But we wouldn't allow a food truck to just pull into Morgan's and start operating. Because they'd also have to get property owner permission, which is you all.
Us. Yeah, I wonder if it would ever be something to think about. You said we don't do commercial activity, but in some sense we do commercial activity at those places.
Yeah,
because
the
we rent them
vending,
out,
yeah, the
right? I mean,
concessionaire, yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
not just that, but I mean, when commercial operators are paying us to rent out parks and things in some way. Right.
It's different,
Yeah.
but yeah,
I mean, when we're talking about revenue generating things, I mean, is something, and maybe they have different thoughts, but, certain areas, the Joe's Bayou, the future park, I mean, there, you do have somebody have the ability to go out there and get a permit through us to be the vendor, like we do have at Morgan's, like a concession vendor. We do offer an opportunity for a concession vendor, mobile vendor, to go at the New Joe's area, or to go at some Morgan's Park, or different things like that. To provide that, because I think that's an additional benefit for the people that are coming to use those parks and those recreation areas.
So if that's something that council would like to investigate, it's very simple from an LDC standpoint to just allow mobile vending in recreationally zoned properties, still requiring property owner permission. And then the city could develop a program, much like we have at Joe's Bayou, where you buy a commercial pass to launch your boat, right? There's some sort of permitting process through whoever or whatever to allow for mobile vending on recreationally zoned properties.
HDR is not listed
No,
either.
correct. Because restaurants are not allowed, or not permitted or conditional in HDR currently.
So, I guess like a similar concept, I think we've seen complaints or issues in the past on the condos on Holiday Isle, trying to offer, have
So-
food trucks show up or whatever.
Yep, so, to answer that question, there's nothing preventing a food truck to being considered as a caterer, okay? So if the condo association pays the food truck to come and serve food that the patrons do not pay for, that's a caterer.
Yeah, but I'm not
So-
talking about caterer, I'm talking about.
Yeah, but
food truck just
if a
coming
food
up.
truck, yeah, but that's how it's
Right.
handled currently. Now, we say, as long as the patrons are not paying you directly and the condo association pays you, right, that you're a caterer, okay? Right? But if they go out there under the guise of a caterer and then they start selling directly, that's different. And therefore, code enforcement could be sent out and said, okay, the understanding was that you were going to be a caterer. You are now commercially operating as a vendor and you need to go.
Yeah, but like, what's the worry by allowing in HDR? I'm just curious. Is there something in y'all's office that?
It's just not allowed per the LDC currently. That's staff's worry.
Right.
Is that it's not allowed.
Right.
From a philosophical standpoint, I mean, if that's something that the LPA would recommended, then staff would have changed and brought that recommendation. If that's something that the council wishes to change and allow it in HDR or allow it, anywhere else, that's, from a philosophical standpoint, staff will make those changes. But,
I know we've talked about in the past about enforcement issues and things like that, and, if there's a way we can make it easier to enforce while not hindering, like the common sense type of stuff, like we're talking about earlier, it would take, and this is not a diss to y'all, but if somebody put a complaint in about a mobile vendor in a parking lot, it might just be the next day till they get the email, then investigate, and they're gone already,
Yeah.
But in certain areas, I just would be interested to know why we can't just do it if there's not an issue, I guess. Like
There's
some of these
nothing
big
stop-
empty parking lots
Yeah.
on Holiday Isle where there's no space.
At this point, there's nothing. There's
Okay.
nothing stopping you all from
Besides
allowing
us.
it.
Okay.
It's just the direction or this is the first iteration really that's being brought forth outside the LPA.
Yeah.
And the logic string behind it was restaurants are allowed in this zone, commercially are permitted, therefore mobile vendors would then be allowed either conditionally or permitted as well. So that's the logic string behind it. If staff was given any other guidance beyond that, we would have brought something else. But that was essentially the understanding at
And
that
so the
point.
temporary and permanent thing is out, that's gone? Is
That's
that what that
gone
means?
because that's one of those things that is practically impossible to enforce.
Got it. Okay, I appreciate it.
Yep.
All right, up next, Councilman Bagley.
Yeah, refresh my memory, because I think it's the power easement, but where's the differentiation? Because we were started talking about Morgan Sports Park. Where's the differentiation between the institutional section over there and the recreational section?
Let me pull the zoning map up real quick. And
Yeah, I've got the map pulled up, yeah. I think it is the power line easement.
I think
So-
you're correct as well.
So you could, north of the power line, you could put in institutional.
institutional zone, yes.
Yes. And then south, where the ball fields are, you couldn't. Okay.
Yeah, so in the parking lot here.
Yeah.
During a big sporting event.
Yeah.
right? If, with council's approval, you could set up, so long as you meet the density requirements, and the parking requirements, right? You could set up a food truck festival
Yeah,
right here in the parking lot during a big sporting event, right? So,
or over at the original city hall.
yep.
Yeah, okay, all right. I just,
Councilman Stevens.
I mean, so, yeah, that is definitely a way to generate money. So would we be allowed to do ice cream at the Gulf, on the beaches? I mean, I know it's a topic that's been
Not
brought
touching
up.
that with a 20-foot pole, no. No, I'm kidding. I mean, if they're if they're classified as a mobile vendor per the state, right? Yeah, why not, right? The issue at hand is there's currently a mobile vendor that actively operates, that can drive along the streets and sell, that has legal non-conforming status, and the agreement with the city. Whereas that's, somebody coming in can no longer do that. And then the beach thing, right? We don't allow commercial operations on the beach with the exception of beach vendors, which is very narrowly defined per Article 1108, beach management, which does not include the sale of food and wares. So,
That was the missing part, thank you.
yep.
I'm hoping I got to my notes quick enough. Just talking about doing the mobile vending and potentially if we're gonna do it at designated parking spots, or I guess park areas, the green zones. If we were to build it in to have the gray water and the freshwater taps and everything, I've talked to several owners of Fort Walton who own the 6 food trucks, and then there's one in Shalimar, and they said that we could probably net anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500 a month if we had a tap, as far as having that. So just little napkin math, I mean,
Yeah.
definitely grain of salt, but potentially a way for us to not make this who's allowed and what's not is if we had designated spots and taps and there was a fee to connect to it or something.
That's very common practice in municipalities where, as part of park development or as they buy up properties for park purposes, that they do develop mobile vending pads that each have, just like an RV pad. They've got an electrical outlet, they've got the sewer hookup, they've got the water hookup, all that sort of stuff. It's completely normal in a regular event.
Yeah, talking to the vendors, they're like, of course, we're mobile, we can carry everything and go, but
Yep.
the luxury for them to really operate at full capacity is to have the hookup.
Yep.
So that's, as we're looking at with the pickleball changing out.
And
this
again, just
area and
like
whatnot.
mentioned with the Joe's Bayou boat launch, right? Commercial boat launch, you can launch there because there's a program, right? You just can't operate there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Whereas, we can develop a mobile vending program, right? Where each permit's for X amount of days, and after that day, you go back into the pool, and then more selected, and if you're selected again, you get it for another, that's just one way. So it certainly is. The ceiling's the limit on that one. The sky's the limit.
Anyone else on mobile vending? All right, seeing none.
Next, primary building structure separation.
All right, anyone on that? All right, Councilman Bagby?
so what is the current fire separation, or is it the thickness of the wall determines how?
Yeah,
And
so-
the
so-
construction technique, if it's concrete block, it's different than?
Yeah, so certain materials obviously have a certain fire rating, and based on the use, right, there's a minimum separation. And that separation based on material and use gives you the separation requirement, okay? Building construction and the fire code regulate that. This is just in the LDC, and it's saying that, even if you can meet the fire separation and building code requirements, you still can't be within 10 feet. So it's really unnecessary. That's all staff's pointing out. However, if it's something that y'all want to maintain for primary structures to be separated at a minimum of 10 feet, certainly out there. It's just from a staff standpoint, it's unnecessary.
That's not my concern
Okay.
as much as do we allow connections above the ground level between the structures?
By connection, do you just mean like physical attachment or hallway?
Could be a
Breezeway.
deck, or it could be a breezeway, a deck, or whatever, because what'll happen is I'll build a carriage house or a guest house or whatever, and or accessory dwelling unit.
So you're talking about an accessory to primary.
Yes.
This does not apply. This is between primary structures. So we're currently in the LDC, certain districts do allow multiple primary structures on the property. Accessory structures are different.
Okay, all right. I'll hold my question until we get to the accessory dwelling
Okay.
units and the,
All right, Councilman Destin.
Yeah, and I was just gonna ask, is this recommendation for getting rid of that, is that citywide or in particular zoning districts?
It'd be citywide.
Okay. The,
Because this particular language doesn't apply to any specific zoning district. It's citywide, so if we pull it out, it's gonna be citywide.
okay, so I guess it wouldn't apply necessarily, well, in a convoluted way. On the harbor, we have 0 setbacks between properties. So while I can't put my structures on my property, I can put my structure within 0 separation.
Yeah, you and your neighbor can build right like this, but you can't build a building right next to your current building on your own property. Yeah,
Doesn't make
it's-
a lot of sense, does
Yep,
it?
yep.
Oh, man. All right, that's it on my side.
Okay.
Anyone else? Nope.
All right, building height in CMU. Again, this is that circular, okay, you're in CMU, so you're non-residential, you get 50 feet and 4 stories. Oh, but there's this footnote, oh, you really can't be, you can only be 35 and 2. You know, that's a really tough conversation to have with people. So staff just recommends make CMU, which, as you may have read in the presentation, is proposed to be consolidated with CMUV. So the CMU zone and the CMUV zone, if you're looking at the zoning map, would become one zone, and so that entire zoning district would be 35 feet and 3 stories. Or 3 stories, not to exceed 35 feet.
Yeah, jump in. Yep.
Just one question is not particularly on that issue, but CMU, as we discovered at our last hearing where we were approving something, the density says between medium and high. Is there any reason why we can't just say medium legally?
I think you know the answer. We could say that.
Okay, is it defensible to say that?
It's defensible to say that. I mean, I can't control what a court would do. I mean, I'll say this, the Burt Harris Act has been revised since the
Made
lawsuit we won.
tougher,
And
right.
it's tougher now, because it's, if you have an ordinance an ordinance change that goes back in density or height or something, at this point, arguably, there could be a cause of action there, which
Okay,
didn't
so-
used to exist.
So it's brighter probably to leave it medium to high and make the decisions toward the medium defensible?
I mean, if you want to combine the districts, you have to think about what's allowed in both. Remind me, which district is the short-term rental a conditional use? CMUV?
The
conditional, right?
CMUV, it's conditional.
Right.
And in CMU, it's,
CMU currently it's permitted, but the consolidated zoning district is recommending conditional, since the CMUV is the stricter
so that
zoning
right there
district.
is a potential legal
Which
issue
is
too.
what I agree with, yeah.
Which I should have pointed out to Steve earlier, but if we are gonna, I don't think we can change from having something be permitted to a conditional use as far as a short-term rental now, because that's post-2011.
We can go the other direction, though,
We can
can't
go the other direction.
we? If we wanted to.
So they would either both have to be permitted, or we leave them as 2 zoning districts. That would probably be the recommendation. Sorry, Steve.
Oh,
Should have talked about that one with you earlier, but.
okay, so leaving CMU and CMUV alone and keeping them separate?
I mean, unless the council
Or-
wanted to allow short-term rentals in both, I think we should keep them separate.
Okay. Yes.
They're permitted in one of them, and they're conditional in one of them. So we would have to leave them as separate zoning districts, is what I'm saying, if you want to keep it conditional. Because if you combine them, you're gonna end up having them permitted in both zoning districts.
Okay, well, if we were recommending that they be combined, and that is the requirement, that one of them, they both have to be permitted, then I would be opposed to that. Leave them
That's my
separate.
point,
I
that you
think
should
we'll-
be aware of that if you
Yeah,
combine the districts.
We understand, so I'm opposed to combining them, as we will get into that later, I suppose.
Okay. Staff will, what we can do, since we're taking Article 4 back to the LPA for some discussion, staff will take a look at, with this new information, we'll take a look at the short-term rental conflicts based on the analysis that we've done.
All right, Councilman Bagby?
Yeah, and this applies to Crystal Beach neighborhood. I'm not sure, how did we get 50-foot buildings in Crystal Beach neighborhood? When did that
So
happen?
50
I thought it was 35 and, okay.
Yeah, 35 for residential uses, non-residential uses are 50 and 4. And that's current.
Yeah, but it's a neighborhood. See,
That's-
it's
yeah.
not a mixed-use district.
No,
It's a neighborhood.
100% understand that that's currently what's on the books. And so staff, when we took a look at all this, right, we tried to take a look at and not change a whole lot of what currently is allowed, other than when it comes to the consolidation. Obviously, there would need to be some changes. I don't believe, no, I take that back. ROI CBN is being requested to combine with CBN, but the heights were the same.
Yeah, how did we get, because in the neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
it's all residential. It's not commercial. I mean, you've got, along the Gulf, you've got the higher
CBR.
density and
Yep.
stuff. Yeah, and I understand that, and I understand the, along 98, why that's different, but the neighborhoods should be the neighborhoods. When, has it always forever been 50 feet? Because I thought it was 35 feet for
Yeah,
20 years
for
ago.
residential, it's been 35 feet. You're not wrong in that. The 50-foot, I don't know how far back the 50-foot goes for non-residential uses, non-dwelling uses. That's certain.
Well, I think the non-residential uses are probably the Village Baptist Church, maybe? I don't know, is that in CBN?
Institutional.
It's,
Yeah, that's right, that's,
So currently, the only permitted uses or conditional uses in CBN that are not residential, museums, historical sites, zoos, and parks, that's one use in our land use table.
Right.
Those are permitted in CBN
Yeah.
as of now. Child daycare services are conditional, and I believe that's it.
so I would say, since we don't have any zoos that I'm aware of, and no 50-foot tall buildings, it's not like we are, taking something away from somebody that exists. I'd like to see us go back for that whole neighborhood, because it's a neighborhood. If it were mixed use, I'd say, okay, well, you guys got me, but it's not mixed use.
so would you recommend just changing the height for non-residential uses to 35 and 3, or just get rid of the non-residentials altogether? Non-residential
Yeah,
use.
I would say it's all,
Okay.
it's just residential.
Okay.
35 feet, 3. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, anyone got any additional comments on that? All right, seeing none.
Next. Water taxis.
How did I get stuck with this one?
They're conditional use in the CMU zone. Everywhere else they're allowed or they're permitted, which is, I believe, South Harbor. I think that's the only other district. Yeah, it's permitted. So staff doesn't really see any reason why a water taxi would be conditional in the CMU district specifically. So we recommended the LPA to make it permitted. They agreed, so.
Anyone have anything counter to that? Councilman Destin?
At the moment, I agree with you, but we don't have a water taxi operating in this town right now, do we?
You know,
we do.
I didn't know of any,
Right.
but I recently did the survey of the transient slips for the map that's being created, and I saw actually several water taxi stop signs. And I took some pictures of them. So somebody's
There's
operating.
one right next to us.
Who knew? So,
Back in my day, it was $5. Now it's 8.
back in my day, you're younger than me.
Oh, man. All right.
Yeah.
So, you got something else?
On this?
Yes. Water taxi? Oh, jump
love
on
to.
in.
What's the MDRV item on Calhoun?
MDRV item on Cal.
Stuck in between the state zone.
Oh, you're talking on the zoning map?
I didn't get the question.
Is that the Valencia?
Medium density residential village.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's the Valencia. Yeah, that's the, 6-story?
It's an old condo.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
the
old
condo.
condo, yeah. Yeah, before 84.
I think we're good, Steve. I think they
Yeah, it's Valencia.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So is the change in what's being recommended and what you are wanting to do is permitted use in the CMU zoning district, is that meaning that places in those zoning districts can now, like, offer it, or, like,
Yeah, right now, if you
before
want.
this, you're not allowed to be dropped off there, or how does, like, what does it really truly do?
Yeah, so right now, if you want to establish a water taxi stop and the subsequent require upland development, you'd have to come in the CMU zone, you'd have to come through for a conditional use to do so. And any DO development deviation. So whereas in the, South Harbor mixed use, whatever DO deviation you would need, to do that is all that would be required, since it's permitted.
Okay.
So you'd have to go through an LPA public hearing and then a city council public hearing to get the conditional use established before staff can approve any sort of DO deviation or development order with
So
that.
it's permitted like in South Harbor.
Correct.
SHMU. We're gonna make it permitted in CMU.
Correct.
This change.
Yep.
Okay. And that allows them to offer stops there.
Correct.
Places like that.
Yeah. I mean, they can currently do it. They just got to go through the conditional use.
Does the marina, or does anyone in the CMU have that conditional use right now?
I'm not aware of any. The CMU zone is
I know
so
it's
small.
Like, what, 4 parcels? It's in
Yeah.
between our 2 parcels.
Yeah, the two.
In between our 2
The 2
parks.
DOs that I've dealt with in that didn't have that as part of their development order. The only real like water taxi stop, if you want to consider it as is the transient slip requirement that we have now for all non-residential marinas, docking facilities. So that was required per the development order, but not a water taxi stop, since that is a specific use called out in the use table.
So is this now the time also to talk about the recreation zoning as well, to be considered in this?
Yeah, absolutely.
That was where I was
Because
going.
like, for example, I mean, why would we not want to give the ability to get picked up by a water taxi on our waterfront parks? I mean, I would love to have that ability.
Again, staff's intent in all this was not to drastically change the characteristics of the zoning districts and do a very detailed and concerted effort with those consolidations, right? The recommended consolidations. So we, on zoning districts that we're not recommending to consolidate, we're not really looking at the uses to change, right? And that's purposeful, because this is such a drastic change to the entire LDC that if we needed to go into the analysis of, hey, is this use appropriate? Should we add this? Should we take this out? Is a whole other effort that once this is complete will become a lot easier.
I agree with you, Kevin. I mean, think Royal Melvin, It's actually recreational, and that's one of the water taxi stops currently.
Right, I think that's got brought up before, and we said we were gonna talk about it at the rewrite maybe, about Royal Melvin specifically being used as a water taxi.
If you all want to add that as a use and as permitted in the recreational district, it's a very simple add. So,
They'll just open us up to like shows and everything then, or we'd just pick what recreational?
well, if it's recreationally zoned, it's generally going to be owned by the city, so that change, any addition to it would have to come to
through
you
you
all
guys
for
anyway.
approval anyway, so.
Yeah, I like it. My only fear on the Joe Bayou side is it potentially turns into a parking lot for people to go to the harbor, which may work because most of the time when it's not summer, it's an empty parking lot, but I see where there's the due diligence that need to be done on that. All right, anyone else on that as far as recreational topics on the one? All right, moving along.
right. Oh, I need to click back in. Echo Housing. This was a fairly unique find, going through the current LDC. Unique because when I brought this forward to Lewis, he'd never heard of it. I'd never heard of it, so can't really find the origin story behind it either. Can understand the intent behind it. I think it's a good intent, but it just opens up Pandora's box. So,
So right now it's essentially just an ADU, additional dwelling unit for elderly. And that's
correct.
kind of where the
Yeah,
gray
it's got to
zone
be
is.
specific for elderly.
Okay, and this is for our village, low-density residential?
It's for any zoning district.
Okay,
So the LDRV does not allow for ADUs. But if someone were to come in and say, I want to build an ADU specifically for my elderly parents, this regulation right here requires us to
is state.
approve it. No, it's not a state thing.
Okay, so this is
this is not a state part. This
Okay,
is
this
this
is
is
us.
unique to us.
Okay.
But it requires us to approve it so long as they can meet the setback requirements.
Gotcha, okay. All right, 2 seconds, let me switch over. All right, Councilman Destin?
Well, judging by I'm almost ready to move into one of those myself, I can give you the background. We had numerous people who came to the council and pleaded with us to allow them to put in housing for their elderly parents or their elderly relatives on the assumption that that was much better than sending them to a nursing home.
Yes.
And no one was hard-hearted enough to tell them no on the council. And that's how it got there. And if we take it out, unless people knew they had it, I don't know that we'll get that much feedback unless it's made public. But it was put there, so to give people an alternative to sending mom to the nursing home.
But you're saying you can still do it, we could still build it, it's just not an automatic, it's just, you have to follow more rules now to do it, is that what
Well,
we're saying?
so again, in the LDRV, accessory dwelling units are not allowed at all, whether permitted or conditional.
Which is why we did it, because you couldn't get through the permitting process.
Right. Gotcha.
And then, do we want to talk about that not allowed anywhere for additional dwelling units now, or is that a different topic? Is that the next one when we get into the zoning itself? I'll wait for the zoning.
But yeah, I mean, just,
Yeah,
yeah,
we'll
we
wait.
can address this specifically, so, I mean, it doesn't consider density, only setbacks, maximum sizes, all
Out
that,
of
so.
curiosity, how many people have we had apply for it?
None.
Except for back in the day, there were some that it was specifically written for that did apply, but that was probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So, do we want to take it out?
Yeah, how's everyone's thoughts and feelings? I mean, if it's not hurting anyone,
No, I wouldn't take it out, but that's just one opinion.
yeah.
Since no one's applying, what's the damage? And if we do get a situation where someone's in that situation and wants to build someplace for their elderly relative to live, then we let them do it. I know that on a couple of occasions, the county and then the city allowed people to move trailers onto a lot that was not allowed to have mobile homes for the specific purpose of letting an elderly relative stay there. And
Yep.
then when that relative passed, they had to take the trailer away. Can't do that with a permanent building, though. You can't take it away.
Yeah, and that's what I think the last slide of my was the conditional temporary uses, right? That's what that would allow for, so. Yes.
All right.
So.
I'm not hard over it, like, you can get rid of it, or?
Yeah.
I mean, we can leave it as is with the LPA's recommendation, and when we get to the public meeting, the
LPA
decision
is
can
to
be
cancel
made.
it, remove
Yes,
it?
to remove it.
All right, so I think it seems like we're gonna lean on the LPA if everyone's zeroed out. Unless, you're saying keep it.
I'm saying keep it, I
Okay.
don't want to kick grandma.
Yeah. You know, that's a winning quote.
I'm hoping Sarah has a big enough house, so I have my own.
All right.
All right.
Next
moving
topic?
along. Yes, let's
Okay.
keep it going.
All right, accessory dwelling units and guest houses? Yeah, let's go. All right, let's go, let's have it.
Yes.
So the recommendation is to limit the size of an ADU to 1,000 square feet max, well, 50% really, up to 1,000 square feet. So right now, if someone has a 1,200 square foot home, they can put a 1,200 square foot accessory dwelling unit on their property, which is essentially another primary dwelling for all intents and purposes, right? A vast majority of municipalities control that by saying you can have an ADU up to 50% of the primary dwelling up to X amount. The recommendation 50%. So if you have a 1,200 square foot primary residence, that means you can have a 600 square foot ADU. Math's pretty simple, easily enforceable, and definitely gets rid of the whole, well, is this a primary home, second primary home type of deal.
So on that, I'm very much for just kind of going through the strong town books and everything of allowing our, I guess in this case, the village area, so our LDR village, low residential, the yellow, the majority of them are quarter acre, which then doing the math allows for like 1.33 ADU, which means you can only have one dwelling unit. I'm very much in the boat that we should be allowing, as long as it's, whether it's a homesteaded or it's the primary residence, I'm not for double renting, but for the sake of offsetting living costs for our locals, as well as potentially adding another workforce housing unit, and it's a win-win across the board. I'm very much for looking into allowing additional dwelling units, whatever, I mean, I'm fine with the LDA's recommendation of 50 or 1,000 square feet or whatever's less, but I'm very much for trying to solve, I think it's the only area that we could potentially get into a little bit of workforce housing in Destin, is allowing for the homeowner to make an addition to offset some supplemental income, whether that be for the insurance or the mortgage. And in addition, I think it's a win-win, because I think it would be a more working class person in that unit.
Yeah, so staff had, prior to the joint workshop between council and LPA, brought the idea of allowing ADUs and the LDRV as, I believe, a conditional use. And that discussion at the LPA basically was no, because they don't want to open up the possibility of short-term rentals, so.
Yeah, and I know there's always a chance for everything, but I think that would generate a lot of health and wealth for our residents and the working class that's keeping Destin afloat. So that's just my 2 cents. Up first is Councilman Bagby.
Okay, cool. All right, so again, definitions, the difference between an ADU and a guest house is cooking ability, right? Or is there more than that?
Yes and no. You can provide a kitchenette in a guest house so long as you don't provide gas to the stove or 220 voltage to the stove. That's it. It's specific to 220 to a stove or gas to the stove.
Okay.
But you can you can put a hot plate in there, you can put a microwave, you can, a fridge, right? You can still do 220 volt or gas to the heating, HVAC, just not to the stove.
Okay, and the accessory dwelling unit, which is what we're really talking about, is there, because, say, a carriage house, do we allow a connection between the primary structure and the accessory structure? Above the ground level, obviously.
Yes, as long as it meets building code, and there's a clear delineation that it is an accessory structure. So if there's a lockout, say you attach it to it and there's a doorway, if it can be locked out, then yes, we would consider it an ADU that's attached, and you can still communicate to the other side of the house, but it's still a lockout, right?
Okay.
Or a breezeway, that's a lockout, right? Something to that effect. So yes, we do allow for that physical connection and internal communication.
Okay, and we're proposing to only allow ADUs in areas that don't allow short-term rentals? Or are we looking to allow them everywhere? Because I thought.
No,
I read
that
everywhere.
where ADUs are allowed is not on discussion topic for this specifically. This is just for dimensional limitation only.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the dimensional limitations, but I
Yeah.
want to make sure what I'm signing up for. So are they allowed in all?
No, they're not allowed.
Residential areas?
No, they are not allowed in all residential areas. They're allowed. They're specifically not allowed in the LDRV.
Okay.
And maybe the MDRV, I believe, but all other zoning districts they are allowed, whether permitted or conditional.
Okay, and so your point is you want to amend the LDR?
And making them a conditional, not a permitted, but a conditional use, so it would come in front of the council to make sure there's some due diligence there, but to allow for a conditional use per the parking, everything that needs to be there to make it happen, but I'm very much for allowing and I think it's in our footnotes already from one of the drafts where it's like, you can't rent them out twice. The landowner has to own in the primary, and if the guy paying rent to the landlord is the primary resident, then he can allow for the additional dwelling. So I'm just trying to bring that into the low residential area, to make sure that if someone wants to offset living costs, that's how we're gonna make Florida affordable.
Okay, and I'm okay with, after graduation at the academy, my first place was this nice old lady in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, who had converted the garage. Her husband had passed away, and she put 2 second lieutenants in there, and we behaved, and, it was fine. I didn't have a problem with it. She didn't have a problem with it, and she got a little income, and we helped around the yard, because she was elderly.
Yeah.
So I'm not opposed to allowing it. I just want to know what we're signing up
Yeah,
for.
I think we'd have to put a big box around. or a
Yeah,
small, tight box
that
around
can
it.
be another discussion when we bring this back. We can also have that discussion with the LPA again. Again, the recommendation at that discussion when staff brought it before was to maintain status quo where ADUs are and aren't allowed. But if that's a discussion that we want to rehash, we didn't bring it forward because the LPA didn't recommend it prior to the workshop, so we just kind of kanked it. But happy to have the conversation again.
And I'm good at the 1,000 as opposed to the 1,200 because, a carriage house typically, unless it's a 2-story carriage house, which would make it a 3-story carriage, it's 484 square feet because it sits right above the garage, a 22 by 22 garage. And so that's kind of, anything above that, you're starting to get into a house.
Yeah, and that was another question that was also, I failed to mention during this slide. Currently, ADUs are gross floor area. Yeah, ADUs are gross floor area, whereas guest houses are heated and cooled area. So the question is, we've received permits in the past where ADUs are above garages, but the garage is considered gross floor area, so therefore we weren't able to permit it. So would the council be amenable to allowing the heated and cooled for ADUs above a garage, since garages aren't heated and cooled generally, just like the guest houses are? Okay. Okay.
right, Councilman Destin, floor is yours.
Always refreshing to find myself aligned with a young brain like the mayor's.
All right. That means it's gonna pass, right?
Yeah, if ADUs are allowed in the LDRV, then the eco housing thing is a non-issue.
Yeah, and I would agree that they should be allowed, and I'm not sure what the utility is of reducing it from 12 to 1,000 or whatever the small reduction is.
Yeah.
I don't get that part. It doesn't make rational sense. And a few sections ago, we decided you shouldn't have the 10-foot separations between buildings, so this, to go other than this direction would seem contrary to the decision we just made earlier. So, you know, I'm gonna be supportive of the mayor's position on that.
Awesome, appreciate that. And then my last point on my notes about that is, to that earlier slide, the primary and the additional dwelling unit, as if someone were wanting to age in place, they could flip, and now they're in the smaller unit, now almost allowing to almost subsidize it through the larger rental unit, but to the point of the owner has to be there, and it
Yep.
can't be two rentals.
Yeah,
It's
and
kind of
that's,
the big
I mean,
cons
we
that I see.
deed restrict right now
Yeah.
ADUs in certain situations. So that can certainly be language added to ADUs in certain zoning districts, that there's a deed restriction that the primary owner, the property owner, has to live on site, whether in the primary or the ADU.
And I'm hoping that would also create a little check and balance between, before their neighbor complains, hopefully they're complaining about the noise before their neighbor to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Seeing none? All right.
Yep. Front yard setbacks. So currently, again, 20 foot is the setback across the board in residential districts. LPA recommended to reduce that to from 20 to 10 feet, with the exception of the vehicular use areas, which would require a minimum of 20 feet to provide for that one parking space, or the depth of a vehicle to fit between the building and the street.
All right, Councilman Destin.
I'm afraid I would oppose that one. As it stands now, we have people parking all over the right-of-way in places they shouldn't. And I know what you're talking about in the areas where it's 10 feet. They're more urbanized. You know, my mother was from New Jersey, and there was no 20-foot setback, but we're not an urban environment. And until we can figure out how to get people off the sidewalks and out of the right-of-way, I really wouldn't be supportive of that.
That was my only thought, is what we've been dealing with. But to your point of road diet, in a way, of kind of reducing the view corridor, I'm all for that visual point, and I think that was the strongest thing that would allow me to go that way. Yet, the sidewalk thing would be my biggest concern. So, 2 cents. Councilman Bagby?
Yeah, and I would agree with Mr. Destin. My concern is more people enclosing their garages. I'm seeing more and more of this, and we can get, whether it's
Additional
doing a
dwelling unit.
short-term rental space or whatever it is, but, they're just enclosing their garages, and then all they have are the 2 parking spots that are on the apron, or, as I think somebody mentioned in a previous meeting, their garage is full of all their furniture that won't fit in their house, or all their sports equipment or whatever.
Well, you're putting distancing requirements on storage units, so why? I mean,
Yeah, I don't think we've done that yet, but
Just
okay.
messing.
So, yeah, I just get concerned that we don't have enough residential parking, and the trend is, and you'll see, because I have some specific questions on the the common boundary, but, yeah, it just, no, I mean, and I understand, I drive through Misty Way all the time, and, man,
Born and raised on it.
it's like, where are these people going to park? Because they're parking all in their yards and the street and the sidewalk, and 5 big trucks parked in one, and it's just like, no.
fair enough.
The swell, yeah.
All right.
All right, moving along.
All right. Common boundary buffer. So the direction was to create an option to get away from the common boundary buffer. Required if you don't do the option, but the option is there to not get rid of the common boundary buffer, but to develop in the common boundary buffer and then bank the required buffer area elsewhere on the property.
You said you had something?
Okay, well, I'll caveat this by, I would have never worried about this, except my neighbor right beside me decided to do this. So at 4711 C-Star Vista, you can go look. They said, hey, can we, go into the setback just a couple of feet? And I was like, oh, okay, go in the setback a couple of feet. So they put a driveway that goes all the way beside their house and around the back. And they have their two required parking spot, tandem spots out there. They never had a garage. It's the only house in Destiny East, I think, that never had a garage. So, well, that was like, okay, that is like, that's not even 2 feet setback. Maybe it's 3 feet setback. So then they decided to landscape it, which was probably because y'all told them you got to landscape it if you're going to do this parking like this. And of course, all those bushes are halfway over on my property. So now my 5-foot setback is like a 3.5-foot setback that my landscaping guys can't get, between my landscaping and their landscaping that is overlapping on my property. So I'm very sensitive to this issue, and I want to know what is the minimum you're going to require for the setbacks if you allow people, and I get it. I mean, I've lived in houses and, where we had the driveway up the side and the garage was way in the back, and what is the minimum setback that's going to be required?
So as it stands, the setback just would apply to the building. So whatever the setback is per the zoning districts. If you're talking setback for a driveway, the intent here is just to allow the driveway along the property line.
So it could be a 0 lot line driveway?
Correct, yes. That's essentially what this would allow, yes.
Which now you're requiring them to landscape, right?
No, because the landscaping requirement would go away.
Ah.
Yeah, because so the common boundary buffer, right, has the 5 foot from the property line inward, and it is to be landscaped. But the option is if you want to build a driveway in the CBB, you take that square footage that's required, take that buffer and place it in front of your home and landscape that area, and now you just have a free and clear driveway.
Okay, then I would want to see like we had in Rosemary, you have to retain your water on your property. Because what's going to happen when you build all these impervious driveways that are a 0 lot line, the water's going to come off the roof line, it's going to hit the driveway, and then it's going to go on the neighbor's lot. And the next thing the neighbor knows is either they got to bring in a bunch of dirt so they can build it up higher than your driveway, or something like that.
Yeah, so the current requirement is that you have to maintain all your stormwater on your property. So during the development phase, the building permit phase, that would be reviewed for. And if they build it and it does happen to go on to your property as the neighbor, then the code enforcement action would be required, and they'd have to build it to how the plan was approved.
To do something like that, I'm thinking of like Cannon Way off of Airport, where it's just the non-pervious asphalt is the strip where your wheels go, and that allows the vegetation to be the buffer.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what is wanted, that's certainly that can be
To your point of having, that's the only thing I
Yeah.
can think of to prevent that, 'cause that's a great point. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
we did that down there, we even put retention, big black tubes in between the squares. So yeah, you drive up that and it's gonna hopefully go into,
Yeah.
But having watched what they put in next door, I'm like, I'm not a big fan of this. I mean, I understand it theoretically.
Yeah, so the buffering landscape requirement would not be there. So those bushes that are hindering your landscape people from going between your home and property line would be a non-issue, right? And then the stormwater issue is a requirement already per the code and will be maintained through this rewrite, that you have to retain all your stormwater on site.
See, the problem that you're gonna run in, I think that you're gonna run into is because we have lots like this all over town, And so the design, if I'm just looking at a set of plans, I go, yeah, okay. It flows right out to the street into the, stormwater drain or whatever. But in actuality, you have to go look at the ground and go, oh, well, this lot's 1.5 feet lower or a foot lower than that lot. So some of that water is going to go right over into the next door neighbor's yard,
Yeah.
which is what's going to happen when it rains.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, do you want to talk about the stormwater review and how that works during building permitting?
Anything in particular?
Just the requirement to maintain, how we review to ensure that the stormwater for a site remains on site rather than running off to your neighbors.
Yeah, so per code, you do have to maintain all your stormwater on your site. We're seeing a lot of that not happening.
Yes.
Because, like I talked about, I know this is kind of a bad word, but when I did the artificial turf presentation, we have seen that people, after they get their COs, have filled in their retention areas in their backyard, have filled in the roadside soils around their property, because they just don't want to see the depression and don't want to deal with it. And then eventually that leads to the stormwater running off their site, because there's nowhere to go.
Right.
So yeah, for the 25-year storm event, or maintaining 1 inch of what falls on your site is what the minimum requirements are, whatever is greater of those two different calculations.
Yeah, so you go look at theirs, there is no swell, there is no retention, there is no nothing. There's just a long driveway that swings around behind the house, and it's like, and he asked me, you mind if we go a couple of feet into the setback? And I'm like, no, I don't care, it's your property, it's 2 feet. But in actuality, I probably should have said, let me see your plans, because I probably would have said, oh, hell no. But, that's a lesson learned on my part. So I just want to read this specific language and what protections are put in for neighbors, because I agree with the parking, but, I would like to see a setback still maintained. So if you got a big enough lot where you want to put a driveway and a little porte-cochere or whatever, or something where you can run into your kitchen with your groceries that you just bought in the rain, I'm okay with that, as long as it's, 5 feet off the setback line.
Yeah, so the porte-cochere would be considered a structure, so that wouldn't be allowed outside of the building setback.
See, they put theirs in the backyard.
Oh,
Where they had the setback.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People will do,
Whatever you allow.
Oh, yeah, I mean, hey, the private sector is creative, so I mean, we can sit here all day long and try to figure everything out, but at the end of the day, the private sector is going to figure a way around it. So.
All right, moving along.
All right. Tandem parking, this kind of fell because of the common boundary buffer discussion, where it's required, and if we're going to get rid of it to allow people to develop a driveway down the side of the house, we're going to have to get rid of the tandem parking requirement for residential uses. So the recommendation was to remove all tandem parking requirements for residential developments. Yeah.
Any discussion on the residential? All right, Councilman Destin.
One question,
Button.
this recommendation for single-family residential or for all residential?
All residential was the,
In that case, that wouldn't work for me. Okay,
but you'd be okay with single family?
Yes.
Okay. What about short-term rental in a single family?
They certainly need to figure out some way to park the cars, so I guess I probably wouldn't have a terrible problem with that. It's where I would start worrying about it was when you got into high density multifamily projects, it wouldn't work there.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else? Seeing none?
All right, cool. All right, additions since the LPA recommendation, home occupations. This is just, yeah.
Really quick on this one, we just basically took what was in state law, put it into the code. It applies whether we put it in the code or not, but we put it in so that code enforcement could actually enforce it, because we can't enforce state law without it. So my recommendation would be to put it in.
Didn't know that.
Yep.
There you go.
And then the conditional temporary uses. The current one that exists in the draft is temporary occupation of an RV for those emergency or unique situations. As we discussed a little bit earlier, medical issues, emergency situations, that sort of stuff. But it's also drafted in a way that as other conditional temporary uses that may be identified can be added to this section, so.
We actually had the issue come up and learned from it.
One question on immediate or emergency, do we not, I don't want to see us define it as, hey, my brother-in-law needs a place to stay for the week. That's not going to be encompassed in this umbrella, is it?
No, if it was a medical issue, we would need documentation from a doctor stating it was a medical necessity. That's what we would require. I don't think it's written all out yet, but that's what we need to put in there.
Yeah.
I would attempt to restrict that kind of immediate need that, you know, the cousins are here this week and we need to put them in the RV, which happens all the time anyway, but when you abuse it, it won't be good.
Very tightly worded.
So it's limited to a 2-year period. They have to be on the driveway. They have to be parked on the driveway, right? That's what I read in 40202G. So.
Yeah, I think this was changed while I was in, like, language is added while I was in Colorado, because it's so new. It's so new, so
Okay.
I'm not 100% familiar with what's in there exactly.
Well, no, it says that if it has to be emptied, the sewer has to be emptied by a professional, licensed professional, and it can't be emptied out. I mean, I'm just reading straight out of the draft that y'all said.
Yeah.
The thing I didn't understand was if it's because of a storm, it's only 6 months, and then it can be extended for another 6 months, not to exceed a year. But for a medical, you know, your relative that has a medical issue, it's like 2 years, or it's a year extended up to a second year. And I would almost think those would be reversed, because having watched what happened to the east of us, I mean, heck, there's still people down there that haven't been able to rebuild, and that was 5 years ago. I mean, so, and then we get into the you know, every 6 months, the council just keeps extending it 6 months, like we've done some of these development orders or other things that we.
That was the governor that did the development orders, not us.
No, I know, but yeah.
But yes, we could make them all just a limit of 2 years, or an annual renewal maybe for everybody, something. Treat them all the same, like a year, and then it can be renewed.
Again, I'm worried about the neighbor, not, you know, if I had a relative that was having to live in the RV because of medical condition and they couldn't build an accessory dwelling unit or what, or I couldn't build one. But at some point, that's not the character of these neighborhoods, you know, because when you start covering up the tires and jacking it up, and it becomes a permanent fixture. And that's not the nature of the neighborhoods. I mean, I don't know. I would, 2 years just seemed like a long time for that to be allowed in the, how did we settle on that time period? Is that
I don't know
in
where we got the 2
legislation?
years, but what about just changing it to a 1 year?
Yeah, I think doing like a 1 year, and then every, you know, just like we do with BTRs, we renew all of them all at once, and we just renew them January 1 or something like that, whatever. You know, that would probably be simplest for staff.
Yeah.
Rather than having to do it on a rolling basis, we just bring all the renewals to council at once.
Yeah, because for the medical thing, it can't encroach in the right of way and all this. I would say, just like we have under the, for storm, because there's really two components in that paragraph. There's the storm and there's the medical. And I would say somebody at the city needs to, or somebody needs to verify that medical condition for that person still exists, so it doesn't become a permanent thing. Yeah, okay. Just gonna go out and put on that glove.
Or I send
Those
them an
goes.
email saying, please send me documentation from your doctor.
All right. That's the last slide, or is that the last chapter?
That's the last slide of all the discussions, and then next is the zoning district comparative analysis.
Okay.
Um,
Let's take a slide at a time.
I mean, it's fairly lengthy, so I hope you all reviewed it. This is, I think I've covered all the stuff. So this is the existing residential districts, right? The intents for each one, and then this is the comparative analysis that we did. So the uses on the left side of the column, and then whether it's permitted or conditional in the columns, as well as the dimensional limitations in the second half of the slide there. You can see that, for the most part, for use-wise, most of the LDR, or all the LDRs are the same, hence LDR, and then the dimensional limitations are also the same. The difference really between these is just where they fall in the city. So LDRV, LDR Village, LDRH, the Harbor, and LDRHI is in the Holiday Isle area. So there is no difference really between LDRV and LDRH, which is why that's one of the recommended consolidations there. The difference between LDRH and V, the difference between LDRV, LDRH, and LDRHI is that HI allows for short-term rentals. So medium densities.
And then Councilman Destin, is your point on this? Can we go and jump in?
It is ongoing forward tonight.
Okay.
My question is, after we look at this tonight, does it go to public hearing?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this will definitely be brought back. I think we're going to take some of this back to the LPA for their input on some of these items as requested earlier. But yes, this will come back to you all once it goes to the LPA at a public hearing.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, nothing gets adopted until it's put into an ordinance.
Yep.
And you're going to have 2 readings on the ordinance after your LPA read on the ordinance. So we're having lots of public meetings and workshops and LPA meetings in the meantime, but the end result is nothing goes into place until you have an ordinance. It's actually going to have 3 public hearings.
Now, the reason I asked the question is the last time I was here for a citywide zoning change, which essentially this is, a lot of skullduggery went on because you don't have the individual public hearings for parcels or even big sections that you do when you do citywide. And I want to make sure that everybody understands what's being changed. And while I've looked at this, I know I've asked over and over for a red line, and I understand why that would be so hard to produce, but we need to make sure that we understand the changes in a comparative manner. And so,
And one thing we could do to that point is we could send out the 300-foot abutter notices to the affected zoning districts. It might get expensive. I might talk to staff about what those costs would be on a citywide basis, or at least for the affected zoning districts, for things like consolidations or combining of districts. We can bring back the cost information, because I think what you're talking about, I remember some of the issues. It was when I first got here in like 2016, 17, because when all those comp plan and LDR changes were made, a lot of people claimed they didn't know about it because it went into the newspaper, but they didn't get the 300-foot. So
that's right.
there was
And
a lot
I'll
of
be-
rezoning done at that time.
I'll be making a motion at August the 5th to direct staff to do that. And
I
so,
think why it happened back then, I mean, it was before most everybody here's time, except for maybe you and Mr. Bagby, but for the most part, I think it was done because of cost. That's why I say I'll bring that information, but they did.
you're being very kind.
I mean, and it would be even cheaper now, though, because we wouldn't be doing the entire city, just a few zoning districts.
Yeah, well, some property changed hands that people weren't aware the zoning had changed on because there was no public notice unless you really delved into it, and it wasn't a matter of cost. Anyway, I want to see that we don't have that happen this time. And like I said, we really need to get our arms around. I know you guys have done some consolidations, and hopefully no dramatic changes in what's allowed in any of it. But, I need a little more confidence
So
in
this
that.
presentation right here kind of runs through, it compares, so like this slide right here, it shows the districts that we're recommending to be consolidated. And then, you go back to this slide right here, and the MDRV and MDRHI, right? Well, let me make sure I'm doing this right. So MDRHI and HDR are being recommended to be consolidated. So then you go back to this one, MDRHI to HDR shows you the difference in dimensional limitations. But what we can do is just make slides specific to the zoning districts that are consolidated, and we can provide that to
That would
council.
help. And my other question is, while we're on the issue, is I understand now that the consolidation of the Calhoun mixed use and the other with a V on it would potentially make conditional uses become accepted. Are there any other districts where we're doing the consolidations that also happens?
Yeah, that will be provided in that change. And I think that all changed with the Burt Harris, which was fairly recent, because prior to, it was more of a, hey, as long as we just don't get rid of the use, we're good, right? We can, as long as we allow for them to go through the process, whether conditional or permitted, it's allowed. But I think the rules have significantly changed with this new Burt Harris, so.
Well, they may have changed. Do the rules prohibit conditional use? Because
No.
yeah,
And- No.
that's the object of the conditional use that was put into the whole system, was so that the council would have some kind of oversight, at least on the conditional uses. And that was part of the comp plan changes and the changes that went in 6 years ago.
The conditional use isn't my concern. It was just specific to the short-term rentals because of that separate state
Right.
law saying we can't prohibit them
Yeah,
unless we had that code in place prior to 2011. So like in CMUV, short-term rentals were not allowed at all. So switching from prohibited to a conditional use,
No, CMUV, they're conditional.
now, I know.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying in the
Gotcha.
past, before we had
Oh.
CMUV, they were not allowed. And when we
Right.
had CMUV, we said, you're allowed
Conditional.
on a conditional basis.
and I-
No violation there. But now if we go back and say, you're a conditional use, but we're not going to have you, or, I'm sorry, now we go to a district where they're permitted and we're going back to a conditional use,
yeah. I
you can
understand.
deny them.
I understand that direction.
Yeah.
We can't go there, but I
Right.
don't want to go from conditional use to allowed use, because that takes us out of the equation, which all of that work that took place 6 years ago, we're trying to put us back into review, at least at some part. So if we
Yeah,
have.
none of that is being recommended. Any use that was in the consolidation, if it was conditional in the other district, it's conditional in the new consolidated district, so.
That's the answer I was looking for.
On this slide, the 50-foot and 4 in CBN is coming out, right?
Correct.
The two columns?
Well, we'll make the change and bring it back for discussion, yes.
Okay, that's all I can ask.
Yep. So for the medium density and high density residential districts, this is on the left side of the screen is the current, on the right side would be the recommended consolidation. So MDRV remains, MDRHI and high density residential would be combined. There is one plot of land that's MDRHI. And it's essentially, I believe it's Sandpiper Cove, I think, and it's built out already. So it's unaffected by this. And then CBN and ROI CBR are recommended to be combined. ROI CBR, I think Mr. Burr has some history on this, because when he and I discussed this specifically, apparently in the past, the ROI CBR zoning district was required for some reason to be developed when everyone really wanted CBN. And the districts are essentially the exact same. The what?
All right, I remember there was some glitch in order to put the harbor pumping through that area. We had to zone in, and maybe I've got that story wrong, but that could be what went on.
Well,
Piper?
CBN and ROI CBR is out in Crystal Beach, not the harbor, so, yeah. Yeah, it was, Mr. Burr's got some history if you want to talk to him about it, or I can bring him up right now and discuss it. But it was very unique. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. The districts are essentially the same. So staff just recommended those to be consolidated, so. CBN and ROI CBR.
It's a military thing now.
Yeah, ROI CBR is Sovereign Isle. Here, Mr. Burr is going to come up and kind of explain. Yeah, ROI CBR is a very unique district, and it's very limited in uses.
Todd Burr, 4510 Luke Avenue. So the history, this is the 38 parcels in Sovereign Isle. At one time, and I bought there in 2014, and about 2015, it was part of ROI TD. And we as a neighborhood came to the planning group at that time. That was the previous regime, Ashley Grana and all those guys, told it, you can't be a part of CBN, we won't let you. It has to be ROI, which seemed odd. But then we said, hey, can we be a different ROI? Can we be our own? Because TD had some things that we didn't want to have possibly coming into our neighborhood just as a possibility. They said, oh yeah, you can do that. I may or may not have taken the template and wrote exactly what was permitted and not permitted and only put in exactly what I wanted, which was long-term residential and everything else, and provided that to the city. And that may or may not have been taken by the planning department and ran through, and is why ROI CBR is so skinny and slimmed down that there's almost nothing to it. Because the crew at the time said, you can't be part of CBN. It is south of 98. It is in nature of a neighborhood and everything else like the rest of the Crystal Beach neighborhood. So when we're talking about going from multiple zoning districts to try to get fewer, as Steve said, as the LPA, I was the proponent because that one's an easy one. That's an easy one to knock off and not have something different and have 38 parcels in its own zoning thing. That is silly. So that's part of the why. I'm happy. I've tried to keep that short. Happy to give you more if you even like, but I don't own there anymore, but I still have plenty of neighbors and friends who are, and I'm passionate about it. So take that for what it's worth. So there was another history about how all those ROIs got in. At some time there was to incentivize other things, and it didn't really work out that way, and it ends up being a lot of homes. As Steve can tell you, I was a proponent of even trying to consolidate more, but they're so different that it from a planning sense, it kind of hurts to try to go lower than 21 when they're not alike. So we kind of get what you can on this chunk. But yeah, you're exactly right.
So, do you have anything? I'm jumping on the same three-letter acronym here. The ROI VR is purple. Is that the same purple that's going on the north of Airport Road?
Is ROI VR, yes.
Okay.
It's ROI Residential Office Institutional / Village Residential. But there's ROI VR in the Crystal Beach planning area.
Got it. Yeah, village, the village in the Crystal. So that changes on their side, and we keep it over on the village side.
Yeah, my conjecture on this is that the future land use map had this whole area as ROI, and they didn't want to be TD, but couldn't change it because the future land use map was ROI.
Yeah, they found a loophole, like we've been talking about.
Yeah.
They found a way.
Yeah, so a brand new district was created.
So let me know if this is gonna create hurt more than it helps. For that purple, especially on airport and everything, I know a lot of that's residential already and it's built out. There's a couple open parcels over there, and I know we've talked a lot about the pocket parks and everything and walkability. Would there be anything that hurts us from allowing some kind of, like, dare I call it not shop, but I guess more food, or like some kind of like smaller, I guess, office institutional village? I guess what office being like tax and like service provider, but not a commercial like corner store or anything of that nature? What? Yeah, we can talk later. In more in person on that.
So it's the intent statement
Yeah,
of the planning area,
I think
right,
that, yeah.
drives what
we're looking for.
what is on the future land use map, right? And then the future land use map designates what the zoning can be,
Gotcha,
right?
okay, yeah. I'll look into it
So,
more.
so the uses in ROI do not necessarily completely entail do not allow for retail for the most part. If it is, it's very, very, very limited. So, yeah, I don't think, and if you're gonna apply it to a zoning district, you just gotta remember, it's gonna apply to
Everything,
all land within that
yeah,
zoning
everything
district.
purple in this case, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's like 6 shades of purple, so.
You know exactly.
The individual shade of purple, yes.
All right. All right. Jumping on in, keep on rolling.
Yeah, I got so, because one of the slides, maybe you just ran through it, but the permitted uses and stuff in the different areas. Yeah, okay, oh, yeah, there. Okay, so that's the CBN. So let me go to that slide because I had several questions. So community residential housing, the small ones are permitted basically everywhere. Is that state law? I think it is,
The
probably.
small, I believe, yes, I believe it is per state law.
Okay, and then the large, the 7 to 14 people, I guess, is a conditional use in a couple of,
In everywhere except for MDRV, where it's
Okay.
permitted.
all right. So, nope, that wasn't my question, not that one. Okay, so in HDR, mobile home development is a conditional use?
Yes.
That doesn't seem high-density residential to me. Do you like stack them on top of each other, or what? I mean, how did that get is that just a holdover from?
It is a holdover from what I understand. I wouldn't even dare to try and guess as to why that's necessarily considered high density. Other than that the HDR is a very limited district that's developed.
Yeah,
And a mobile home development is not necessarily the highest and best use in that zoning district.
Yeah, what happened was we had prohibited them anywhere in the city, and
Yeah.
then a law was passed that said you can't do that.
right.
So we put them where we didn't think anybody'd build them.
Okay, see, now that explanation
Getting to
makes-
share all the tricks afforded.
that explanation actually makes perfect sense to me.
I kind of figured that as
Okay.
I just didn't want to say it.
Yeah,
40 years as a city.
You and I were
you weren't even born yet, come on. That
we got
actually
here.
makes perfect sense to me, okay. Yeah,
But they have the option to put them there if they want.
yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I'm gonna buy a $1 million, half an acre to put a mobile home on. Yeah, okay, got it.
Spent all the money in the land. Thanks, Mr. Destin.
Your mic was off.
All right, moving into mixed uses. Let me just get to the last slide. So here's the mixed use consolidation. ROI VR will remain. ROI TD and CBR, Crystal Beach Resort, is recommended for consolidation, and then CBR. Oh, and then since ROI CBR is technically a mixed use, just by title only, it's considered in this consolidation for ROI CBR and CBN.
Is there any language for the, oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong titles, never mind.
No worries. So something to look at specifically with the ROI, the consolidation of the ROI TD and CBR, which is the CBR district in Article 4. There are some uses in the ROITD that are not allowed in the CBR. And so as part of the the specific development criteria, we stated that those uses in ROITD are only allowed north of a certain area. So therefore, even though they're allowed per the zoning district, if you're not north of that, which is where the TD is, they're not allowed in the CBR in that area south of. I want to say it's the power line easement, but I'm even thinking that might be even too far south. Thank you. So everything north of Luke Avenue, where the TD is, where all those things that are allowed that are not allowed in CBR is only where it is allowed per the new CBR district. So that's how we creatively got around being able to consolidate those two. So, make sense?
Yep.
Questions, concerns?
See none of my.
So here's the specific analysis on the CMU and CMUV. These slides will be provided at a later date, Mr. Dustin, when it comes to the specific consolidated zoning districts. And as you can see, if you look at the dark squares, that's the difference. That's where we highlight the differences between the zoning districts. So we'll maintain that formatting and everything. So here's the dimensional limitations between CMU, CMUV. As you can see, really the only difference is the density. You get higher density in the CMUV versus the CMU. North Harbor, South Harbor, we're not recommending any changes to those. Gulf Resort, High, and then Holiday Isle mixed use, and Bay Resort mixed use, I believe, which, by the way, the Bay Resort mixed use only has 2 lots in all of the city, and it's where the Destin Chamber is. So it's super tiny. It's the little jut out north of 98 in the Crystal Beach area. That's the only place where it exists.
It's our enclave from the annexed.
Yeah. So that the BRMU, we're recommending just go away, and then those lots be rezoned to commercial general.
Just kind of a thought, don't really have a question on it. For the North Harbor MU, so that NHMU, that always kind of seemed like, when you're looking at the Live Local Act, that House Bill 102, that always seemed kind of like what they were talking about is like something of that area. I guess we can talk offline on that, but I guess if there's zones that we've identified that could potentially work for that mixed-use Live Local Act, is there something that we could put in that language to just maybe let them know it's there, let them know that we want to work and partner on that in some way? I don't know if we put much thought in trying to overlay a clear roadmap for those areas that we would want to see that kind of state incentive.
I don't know too much specifically about the LLA and how it ties into your land development code.
Okay.
I would venture to say, just off the cusp of what I do know about it, is we don't want to include that sort of language in the LDC. We just want to make some sort of ordinance or policy on it.
Okay.
That references,
That makes sense.
so that way it's not,
Locked in, and then it changes, yeah.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Yep, so mixed use analysis, again, ROI VR stays the same, ROITD and CBR are consolidated, with that caveat that all the uses that are not allowed in CBR but allowed in TD are only allowed north of Luke Avenue. ROI CBR and CBN, as we discussed a minute ago, CMU and CMUV, but it sounds like that's got to be separated out just due to the short-term rental stuff. And then I know this slide says Holiday Isle mixed use and the BRMU are consolidated, but that's actually incorrect. It should just be BRMU and CG. Really the BRMU just goes away because it's the intent behind it is just as we grow and annex, like those lots become BRMU. which isn't necessarily appropriate. So we really need to be more concerned, and the annexation language in Article 2 really kind of dives into how that annexation stuff would work based on the policy that you all recommended. So yeah, so the BRMU just kind of goes away, and then those two lots would just be zoned CG. All right, commercial zoning districts, we got CG, CTS. So commercial general, commercial trades and services, which is a quasi-industrial zone, but not quite, and then commercial limited. And commercial limited is very limited because it's limited to one lot, which is where the Best Buy is. So again, it's minuscule. So the consolidation of the CL and CG just makes sense, and the CTS, because CTS is really a unique zone, so it remains the same. Other zoning districts, recreational and conservation stays the same, no changes to those. And then industrial, institutional, and airport, again, no changes to those. So consolidating the zoning districts, here we have basically what the new colors of the map would kind of look like. And again, BRMU, I know it says HMI or HIMU, but really it's just HIMU, and then BRMU and CG. So, aligning it all with the planning areas, the village planning area. So those districts, consolidated zoning districts, identified in the circles and their colors, would be appropriate for the village planning area. Holiday Isle, Gulf Resort, Crystal Beach, Harbor. Harbor really is, it's a smaller planning area comparative to some of the other ones, especially the village, but there's just so much going on in it. And then the Town Center Commons. And then Henderson is obviously just Henderson Beach State Park, and then the airport is literally just the airport lot. So, so that's really it in conclusion, right? Staff, we did that comparative analysis. We looked at the character of the zoning district, and we really took that into consideration before making these recommendations. And we felt that all these consolidations were really appropriate just based on the similarities. Yeah, there are some changes, some differences between them, but they were so minor that we felt that it was appropriate, and the LPA concurred with that. So, and then this just kind of goes into all the various other comparative analysis. So that's it.
Final thoughts, Article 4. It's here. History is here.
We'll be back before you
Please
again
don't.
someday soon.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So you're going to take all these inputs back to the LPA, going to rework that, maybe rework a little bit of the draft Article 4, and then bring it back to us in a meeting or in a workshop?
Public meeting was the intent, based on the approval of the workshop schedule. Because we already have the recommendation from the LPA, but we'll still have to do the ordinance. Since it is a change to the LDC, we'll have to do the ordinance hearing with the LPA.
Yeah.
So what we can do is we can just tie these changes up into that meeting with the LPA with the ordinance, and then bring that recommendation to you all, or we can just do a public hearing with just these changes, and then go back to the LPA with the ordinance, and then come to you all. So, yeah.
I'm just
It's-
asking
yeah,
what the
it's-
plan
yep.
is. I mean,
Yeah, well, Kim,
I think
Lewis, and Tina.
we should rework it, take it to LPA, get their recommendations, and then come back to you at public hearing.
All right.
And we're doing that throughout the next meeting. We're not waiting, we're doing it as it's
Yeah.
happening, right?
Correct.
Per, right.
Yeah, most of
Okay.
these things have been to LPA
Correct.
several times
Right.
already.
Yeah.
So we'll
Every
have a
time
public
we
hearing on
change
this
it,
before we have another, a second or third workshop, maybe.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Nice. All right. Seeing no further discussions, Article 4 is in the bag for now. Oh.